intense psychological study of people, objects, and their surroundings, coupled with an earnest Christian devotion, fueled Rembrandt's life and work. Incredibly gifted as an artist from a very young age, he became a master of portraits of all types: historical, biblical, and mythological scenes, as well as simple, charming, but dramatic landscapes. He used many types of materials and techniques with unusual sensitivity and spontaneity to develop his message. His approaches to composition, color usage, and shadow were ever-changing to produce the most powerfully moving but most natural moments of human existence. His supreme mastery of light and texture to emphasize emotional depth weaved a common theme through all of his creations, cementing his status as one of art's greatest innovative masters. These qualities are evident from his large, ambitious early history paintings to his more intimate and glowing later style. The iconic genius is generally regarded as the most important artist in Dutch art history, as his work epitomized the great period of wealth and cultural achievement known as the Dutch Golden Age. The Archangel Raphael leaving Tobias's family, 1637, now housed in the Louvre in Paris, stands as one of the artist's most compelling religious works, embodying both his technical mastery and his profound capacity for psychological insight. Drawing upon the narrative from the apocryphal Book of Tobit, the painting captures the climactic moment when the Archangel Raphael, having guided Tobias on his journey and restored Tobit's sight, reveals his divine nature before departing. Rather than presenting the scene as a distant or purely theological vision, Rembrandt reinterprets it through the lens of human intimacy and domesticity, thereby making the miracle tangible for his 17th century audience. At the heart of the painting lies the tension between the celestial and the earthly. Raphael is shown ascending with wings unfurled, bathed in radiant light that sets him apart from the figures below. His gesture is one of departure, signaling both the fulfillment of his divine mission and the transience of angelic presence. In contrast, the family remains grounded in their humble surroundings. Tobit, newly restored to sight, raises his hands in blessing and awe, while Tobias and Anna bow in gestures of reverence and gratitude. The diagonal composition linking Raphael's ascending figure to the earthly responses of the family creates a dynamic interplay between heaven and earth, eternity and temporality. Light functions as a crucial narrative and symbolic device in the composition. Raphael's form radiates an otherworldly illumination, establishing him as the embodiment of divine revelation. By contrast, the family is bathed in a softer, more naturalistic glow that ties them to the realm of ordinary human life. This contrast in lighting underscores the fleeting nature of divine manifestations, reminding the viewer that the angel's departure signifies a return to the everyday, albeit one transformed by faith and gratitude. In this sense, Rembrandt deploys chiaroscuro not only for dramatic visual effect, but also as a theological metaphor for the passing presence of the sacred. Equally striking is the artist's sensitivity to human emotion. Unlike earlier depictions of angelic visitations, which often emphasized grandeur over intimacy, Rembrandt chooses to dwell on the authenticity of familial response. Tobit's expression reveals not only gratitude for the miracle of regained sight, but also a deeper sense of spiritual renewal. Tobias and Anna, with bowed heads and folded hands, embody humility and reverence. Their gestures are ordinary and profoundly human, suggesting that divine encounters are not confined to the extraordinary but can be interwoven with daily existence. The cultural and religious context of 17th century Holland further illuminates the painting's resonance. For a Protestant audience, the story of Tobit offered an exemplar of piety, family loyalty, and trust in divine providence. Raphael, majestic yet accessible, embodies God's intervention in human affairs, while the family reflects the values of devotion and humility central to Dutch Calvinist spirituality. In this sense, Rembrandt's painting transcends mere illustration of scripture. It becomes a meditation on the role of faith in ordinary life and the enduring presence of divine grace, even after the angel departs. The theme of departure itself carries theological weight. Angels in Scripture rarely linger. Their presence is transient, their mission precise. By emphasizing Raphael's moment of leave-taking, Rembrandt invites viewers to contemplate the significance of faith after the miracle. The message is clear. Divine grace does not vanish with the angel's absence, but endures as memory, transformation, and spiritual conviction. For the viewer, the painting becomes a mirror, urging reflection on how fleeting moments of revelation shape one's ongoing life of faith. The Archangel Raphael leaving Tobias's family exemplifies Rembrandt's genius in blending biblical narrative with psychological depth and cultural relevance. Through luminous contrasts, expressive gestures, and a balance between the sublime and the everyday, he transforms a scene of angelic departure into a timeless meditation on faith, gratitude, and the human encounter with the divine. The painting reminds us that while visions may fade, their imprint on the human heart remains enduring. Rembrandt's The Stone Bridge, 1637, now housed in the Rijksmuseum in Amsterdam, is one of the artist's most celebrated explorations of landscape painting, a genre he pursued intermittently but with remarkable originality. Unlike the biblical or historical narratives that dominate much of his oeuvre, this work demonstrates his capacity to infuse ordinary scenes of nature with drama, monumentality, and a sense of transcendence. Painted during a period when Dutch landscape painting flourished as a distinct genre, the Stone Bridge stands apart for its fusion of natural observation with an almost theatrical manipulation of light and atmosphere. At first glance, the composition appears deceptively simple. A sturdy arched bridge, stretching across a stream, framed by trees and a rural dwelling. Yet the work's power lies not in its descriptive details, but in the orchestration of light and shadow. A dramatic shaft of sunlight pierces through a dense canopy of storm clouds, illuminating the bridge and parts of the surrounding landscape, while much of the scene remains engulfed in brooding darkness. This dynamic interplay of light, reminiscent of Rembrandt's Chiaroscuro in portraiture and history painting, imbues the scene with a sense of heightened significance, elevating an everyday Dutch landscape into a meditation on the sublime. The bridge itself serves as both a literal and metaphorical focal point. Structurally, it anchors the composition, drawing the viewer's eye to the illuminated stone arch and guiding attention toward the receding distance. Symbolically, bridges often represent transitions or connections between past and present, the natural and the human, the earthly and the spiritual. In Rembrandt's painting, the monumental emphasis on the bridge suggests a deeper meditation on human presence within the natural order, highlighting the fragile yet enduring interventions of humanity amidst the vastness of nature. Equally striking is Rembrandt's treatment of atmosphere. The turbulent sky with its roiling clouds and sudden break of light introduces a mood of both foreboding and revelation. The storm-laden environment recalls the dramatic landscapes of German and Flemish masters, such as Hercules Segers and Peter Paul Rubens. Yet Rembrandt avoids the overt allegorical or mythological references typical of their works. Instead, he imbues the scene with an understated spirituality, where the forces of nature themselves seem to echo biblical themes of divine intervention, judgment, or grace. The landscape, though devoid of overt religious imagery, carries an almost sacred weight through its manipulation of light and mood. In the broader context of Dutch Golden Age painting, the stone bridge diverges from the serene, orderly compositions of contemporaries such as Jacob van Ruysdael or Jan van Goyen, who often celebrated the calm beauty of the Dutch countryside. Rembrandt, by contrast, sought intensity and drama, transforming a modest rural scene into a stage where light and shadow enact a cosmic struggle. His landscape is not merely a record of geography, but a deeply imaginative vision that resonates with the emotional and spiritual undercurrents present throughout his work. The rarity of Rembrandt's landscapes, fewer in number compared to his portraits or religious scenes, renders the stone bridge especially significant. It reflects his experimental engagement with the genre, where he applied the same psychological depth and dramatic sensibility found in his figural paintings to the natural world. The painting invites viewers to experience nature not as a passive backdrop, but as an active, almost living force, capable of evoking awe, humility, and contemplation. The stone bridge exemplifies Rembrandt's unique contribution to landscape painting, a vision that transcends mere topographical representation to explore the intersections of humanity, nature, and the divine. Through his masterful use of light, composition, and atmosphere, Rembrandt transforms an ordinary Dutch scene into a profound meditation on the drama of existence, making the landscape itself a bearer of meaning and emotion. Landscape with the Good Samaritan, 1638, occupies a rare and important position within his oeuvre, being one of only 6 surviving oil landscapes and one of the few narrative works embedded within a natural setting. Now housed in the Chiaroscuro Museum in Krakow, Poland, the painting combines Rembrandt's characteristic dramatic sensibility with a biblical parable that emphasizes charity, human suffering, and moral obligation. The result is a work that transcends mere illustration of scripture, situating the viewer in a landscape charged with both narrative tension and spiritual resonance. The subject of the painting derives from the parable in the Gospel of Luke, 10:25-37, in which Christ tells the story of a Samaritan who aids a traveler beaten and left for dead, after both a priest and a Levite pass him by without assistance. Rather than focusing exclusively on the figures, Rembrandt expands the scene into a vast, rugged landscape in which the small-scale human drama unfolds amidst overwhelming natural surroundings. This compositional decision situates the moral lesson within the broader context of human vulnerability before nature and fate. The figures are almost secondary to the environment, forcing viewers to search the canvas to locate the Samaritan and the injured man, and in doing so to engage actively with the parable's ethical message. The landscape itself is imbued with a sense of gravity. Painted in oil on oak panel, the composition demonstrates Rembrandt's mastery of tonal contrasts and atmospheric effects. The terrain is uneven, punctuated by steep slopes, jagged rocks, and heavy foliage, creating a visual sense of struggle that mirrors the physical and moral difficulty of the Samaritan's act. The subdued palette and the interplay of light and shadow convey an atmosphere that is simultaneously foreboding and redemptive. Light falls not in grand beams but in subtle gradations, guiding the eye toward the figures without diminishing the prominence of the surrounding landscape. Thematically, the painting marks a departure from the more conventional depictions of the Good Samaritan, which often emphasize the immediate moment of aid or the Samaritan's compassion. Rembrandt instead embeds the act within a broader, almost existential context. The figure's smallness underscores human fragility, while the rugged environment symbolizes the arduous path of moral duty. This approach resonates with Rembrandt's broader artistic vision, in which biblical narratives are not merely illustrated, but humanized, dramatized, and refracted through the realities of suffering and perseverance. The work also bears historical significance within the trajectory of Rembrandt's career. Painted in 1638, it belongs to the period when he was experimenting with landscape as an independent genre. While Dutch landscape painting of the Golden Age typically celebrated the ordered beauty of the countryside as seen in the works of Jacob van Ruisdael or Jan van Goyen, Rembrandt imbued his landscapes with heightened drama and narrative weight. Landscape with the Good Samaritan exemplifies this divergence. It is less a pastoral idyll than a meditation on struggle, compassion, and divine justice manifest in ordinary human action. The painting's provenance adds another layer of cultural and historical importance. Acquired by Jean-Pierre Norblin de la Gourdaine in Paris and eventually entering the Czartoryski collection in Puławy, it became part of Poland's artistic patrimony under Izabela Czartoryska's pioneering efforts to preserve cultural heritage. Its looting by German forces in 1939 and eventual restitution after World War II through the efforts of Karel Estreicher further underscore the painting's symbolic value, not only as an artwork of profound moral and spiritual content, but also as a testament to cultural resilience in the face of historical devastation. In conclusion, Landscape with the Good Samaritan demonstrates Rembrandt's ability to transform a biblical parable into a profound meditation on the human condition. By merging narrative subject matter with a dramatic and almost overwhelming natural environment, Rembrandt elevates the story of the Samaritan into a universal reflection on compassion, duty, and the moral trials of life's journey. Its layered historical trajectory from its creation in the Dutch Republic to its preservation in Poland further amplifies its significance as both a masterpiece of art and a cultural emblem of endurance. Portrait of Saskia van Uylenburg, 1635, stands as one of the most intimate yet publicly resonant works from the early phase of his career. Painted shortly after his marriage to Saskia in 1634, the portrait not only celebrates the artist's wife, but also encapsulates Rembrandt's growing mastery of portraiture and his ability to balance personal affection with the grandeur expected of commissioned likenesses. Saskia, the daughter of a respected Friesland burgomaster, brought Rembrandt both social connection and financial security, and her image became one of the most frequently recurring subjects in his art during the 1630s. In this portrait, Saskia is presented in lavish costume, adorned with a broad-brimmed hat, ornate jewelry, and fine textiles that emphasize her status and refinement. Yet despite the sumptuousness of her attire, Rembrandt's handling of paint imbues the sitter with warmth and vitality rather than aloof grandeur. The subtle modeling of her face, softened by the interplay of light and shadow, conveys both dignity and tenderness, situating Saskia not only as a figure of social standing but also as a beloved partner. This duality between the personal and the public is a hallmark of Rembrandt's early portraiture. The work also demonstrates Rembrandt's ongoing exploration of light as a tool of psychological expression. A strong, directional light illuminates Saskia's features, focusing the viewer's gaze on her youthful face, while the darker background enhances the immediacy of her presence. The interplay of textures, velvet, lace, metal, and skin is rendered with remarkable precision, yet without sacrificing the overall unity of the composition. Through such painterly strategies, Rembrandt elevates Saskia's likeness from mere representation to a meditation on individuality and presence. Historically, this painting also belongs to a broader cultural context in which portraiture served as both personal commemoration and social display. For Rembrandt, painting Saskia was not only an act of conjugal devotion but also a demonstration of his ability to compete with leading portraitists in Amsterdam. By combining intimacy with magnificence, he appealed to a clientele eager for portraits that reflected both wealth and individuality. Saskia, therefore, becomes both muse and model, a personal subject through whom Rembrandt defined his artistic identity at a crucial moment in his career. The enduring appeal of Portrait of Saskia van Uylenburg lies in its fusion of love, status, and artistry. It is at once a record of a young marriage, a display of painterly virtuosity, and a cultural artifact that reflects the aspirations of 17th century Dutch society. More than a likeness, it is an image suffused with the vitality of its sitter and the ambition of its creator, embodying the early promise of Rembrandt's genius while foreshadowing the depth and psychological complexity of his later works. Painted in 1640, Self-Portrait at the age of 34, now housed in the National Gallery in London, marks a pivotal moment in Rembrandt van Rijn's exploration of self-representation. Among the more than 40 painted self-portraits attributed to him, this work stands out for its striking combination of personal introspection and art-historical dialogue. Unlike earlier, more experimental renderings of his own likeness, this portrait reveals an artist at the height of his career, confidently situating himself within the lineage of Renaissance masters while simultaneously asserting his unique vision. The painting's composition directly references Raphael's portrait of Baldassare Castiglione, Louvre, and Titian's A Man, with a quilted sleeve, now generally identified as Portrait of Girolamo Barbarigo, National Gallery. Both works were accessible to Rembrandt in Amsterdam, then a thriving hub of Europe's art trade. His decision to emulate these canonical models was not merely a matter of stylistic borrowing, but an intentional act of self-fashioning. By adopting the noble bearing, dignified posture and sumptuous attire of Renaissance humanist and aristocratic portraiture, Rembrandt aligned his own image with the cultural authority of Italy's most revered painters. In doing so, he constructed a visual claim for his intellectual and artistic status in a period when painters were striving to be regarded not as mere craftsmen, but as learned figures akin to poets and philosophers. The self-portrait also reflects Rembrandt's ongoing experimentation with costume and identity. Here he appears in attire already considered anachronistic in the mid-17th century. A fur-trimmed cloak, embroidered doublet and a soft cap. Such garments, however, were never intended to depict his contemporary wardrobe. Instead, they serve as theatrical devices, emphasizing timelessness and evoking an aura of grandeur. In contrast to his self-portrait, leaning on a stone wall, 1639 etching, where his stance and expression conveyed rakish informality, the 1640 portrait is more controlled, projecting gravitas and mastery. The careful handling of light, with its subtle chiaroscuro, further enhances this sense of authority, illuminating Rembrandt's visage against a subdued background. This self-fashioning is not only a performance of status but also a meditation on artistic identity. By situating himself within the continuum of European portraiture, Rembrandt both acknowledges his debt to past traditions and demonstrates his ability to rival, even surpass, them. The confident gaze and the tactile rendering of textures underscore the artist's technical virtuosity, while the conscious evocation of Raphael and Titian situates him within a broader dialogue of cultural memory. Self-Portrait at the age of 34 reveals Rembrandt at his most self-aware, a painter at the zenith of his career, confidently negotiating the intersections of personal identity, artistic lineage, and professional ambition. It is not merely a likeness, but a carefully staged declaration of authority, an assertion that Rembrandt belonged to the pantheon of Europe's great masters. Ironically, in contrast to his piety, Rembrandt's private life was strewn with controversy. From his relationships with women to his management of his personal finances, he walked a line of perpetual disarray and chaos in direct opposition to his public popularity and career achievements. In 1635, Rembrandt and Saskia rented a house while waiting for a new one to be renovated in an upscale area that was quickly becoming known as the Jewish Quarter. The steep mortgage on the new home was what ultimately caused the couple's later financial distress. It was there that Rembrandt frequently sought out his Jewish neighbors to model for his Old Testament scenes. Although they were by now affluent, the couple suffered several personal setbacks. Their son Rambatus died 2 months after his birth in 1635, and their daughter Cornelia died at just 3 weeks of age in 1638. In 1640 they had a second daughter, also named Cornelia, who died after only 1 month of life. Only their fourth child, Titus, who was born in 1641, survived into adulthood. Saskia died in 1642, soon after Titus's birth, probably from a long struggle with tuberculosis. Rembrandt's drawings of her on her sick and deathbeds are among his most riveting works. As Douglas Mannering described in his Life and Works of Rembrandt, Rembrandt's private life now became tangled, although the evidence is tantalizingly difficult to interpret. In 1642, Rembrandt hired a widow of peasant stock named Geertje Dirks to help care for 9-year-old Titus as Saskia was ill. Geertje became Rembrandt's lover, but their relationship had difficulties. He entered a period of poor behavior, amassing debts and coming under criticism from friends, the church, patrons, and clients. Geertje later charged Rembrandt with breach of promise by claiming that he had proposed to marry her. She was awarded yearly alimony, although Rembrandt tried for years to have her committed to a poorhouse after learning that she had pawned some of Saskia's jewelry. Although he was in a strained financial situation, he still felt obliged to pay for her to live at a house of correction from 1650 to 1655. Painted in 1641 and now preserved in the Royal Castle, Warsaw, the girl in a picture frame occupies a unique position within Rembrandt's oeuvre. Known also by the titles The Jewish Bride and The Girl in a Hat, the work belongs to a trio of Rembrandt paintings in Polish collections, alongside The Scholar at the Lectern and Landscape with The Good Samaritan. Although questions surrounding its authorship persisted for decades, technical and stylistic analysis in 2006 confirmed its authenticity. More than a portrait, the painting exemplifies the 17th century Dutch fascination with the tronier genre, dedicated not to individual likeness, but to studies of character, costume, and expression. One of the most striking features of the work is its feigned picture frame, visible along the bottom and right edges of the panel. This trompe-l'œil device disrupts the conventional boundary between image and reality, creating the illusion that the sitter leans outward toward the viewer. Such a theatrical strategy reflects Rembrandt's mastery of pictorial illusion and his ability to animate the painted surface with psychological immediacy. The sitter, adorned in a dark red velvet dress, black hat, and pear-shaped pearl earrings, projects an aura of timeless dignity. Yet her costume bears little resemblance to the fashion of the 1640s. Rather, it belongs to the repertoire of historical dress garments deliberately associated with antiquity, myth, or biblical narrative. Rembrandt frequently employed such attire in his paintings and etchings, not to document contemporary life, but to evoke a sense of universality that transcends time. The painting's history reveals layers of artistic experimentation. X-radiography undertaken during conservation between 2005 and 2006 uncovered traces of an earlier composition beneath the visible surface. A woman seated slightly to the left, wearing a fashionable ruff and bonnet. This unfinished portrait was abandoned and the panel repurposed for the girl in a picture frame. Significantly, Rembrandt is not known to have reused supports for commissioned portraits, reinforcing the interpretation of this work as an independent exercise rather than a client-driven commission. Restoration efforts further uncovered the artist's vigorous brushwork, particularly in the textures of the sitter's chest and right sleeve, where overpainting had previously obscured his original handling of paint. The reattribution of the painting to Rembrandt following its restoration underscores both its technical brilliance and its conceptual inventiveness. By transforming a discarded portrait into a trony, Rembrandt not only avoided the constraints of likeness but also experimented with illusionism, costume, and expression. The sitter's direct engagement with the viewer, framed as though she was stepping beyond the limits of the panel, exemplifies the artist's lifelong preoccupation with the porous boundary between art and life. In sum, the girl in a picture frame is less a representation of an identifiable woman than an exploration of pictorial possibility. Through its theatrical frame, timeless costume, and expressive vitality, the painting demonstrates Rembrandt's ability to transform a simple study into a profound meditation on presence, illusion, and the enduring power of the painted image. Painted in 1641, the scholar at the lectern, also known as the father of the Jewish bride, occupies a distinctive place within Rembrandt's oeuvre. Alongside the girl in a picture frame and landscape with the Good Samaritan, it belongs to the rare group of Rembrandt paintings preserved in Polish collections, now housed in the Royal Castle, Warsaw. The painting exemplifies both the artist's engagement with the archetype of the scholar-philosopher and his experimental approach to pictorial materials during the early 1640s. The composition presents an elderly figure seated before a lectern, his presence marked by both gravitas and individuality. The sitter wears a black hat and a grey-brown cloak with a greenish undertone, lined with fur and adorned with a gold chain. Such attire lends the figure an aura of dignity, situating him within the visual tradition of learned men and philosophers that Rembrandt frequently explored. Yet unlike his more generalized renderings of biblical patriarchs or allegorical scholars, this figure bears unmistakably personal features. The wart on his left cheek and the pronounced redness of his nose. These physical details resist idealization, suggesting that the painting may in fact be rooted in the likeness of a specific individual, even if framed within the conventions of the scholar type. Beyond iconography, the work is significant for its material foundation. Executed on a poplar panel, it is one of only 5 known instances in which Rembrandt or his workshop employed this particular support. Technical research indicates that the artist likely acquired a batch of poplar panels around 1639–1641 and experimented with their qualities. This practical choice reflects both the dynamics of the Amsterdam art market and Rembrandt's ongoing investigation into how different supports might affect his handling of paint, texture, and finish. The broader context of Rembrandt's depictions of scholars and philosophers situates this work within a humanist tradition of the 17th century. In an age when the Dutch Republic prided itself on learning, trade, and cultural exchange, the figure of the solitary intellectual embodied ideals of wisdom, reflection, and moral seriousness. Yet Rembrandt departs from generic representations by foregrounding corporeal specificity. The imperfections of the sitter's face, rendered with painterly sensitivity, convey the sense of a lived presence rather than an abstract archetype. This union of type and individuality epitomizes Rembrandt's realism, a fidelity to both the symbolic function of the image and the tangible reality of human experience. The scholar at the lectern exemplifies Rembrandt's dual preoccupations in the early 1640s. A commitment to character-driven realism and a willingness to experiment with material supports. The painting reflects not only the intellectual culture of the Dutch Republic, but also the artist's broader ambition to infuse timeless archetypes with the immediacy of lived humanity. As part of the Warsaw collection, it stands as a testament to Rembrandt's ability to balance universality with individuality, elevating the simple motif of the scholar into a meditation on presence, mortality, and the dignity of the human condition. Rembrandt van Rijn's The Night Watch, 1642, formerly titled The Company of Captain Frans Banning Kock and Lieutenant Willem van Ruytenbusch preparing to march out, remains one of the most iconic group portraits in Western art. Commissioned for the banqueting hall of Amsterdam's Civic Guard, the painting not only commemorates a specific militia company, but also transcends its civic function to articulate a broader meditation on leadership, hierarchy, and collective identity in the Dutch Golden Age. The work's monumental scale, combined with Rembrandt's daring manipulation of chiaroscuro, invests the scene with a theatricality that disrupts the static conventions of militia portraiture, presenting instead a vivid spectacle of motion, ambiguity, and psychological interplay. At the painting's center, Captain Banning Kock, clad in black with a striking red sash, extends his arm in command, while his lieutenant, Willem van Ruytenbusch, stands resplendent in pale yellow, adorned in ostentatious garments. The juxtaposition of their attire initially invites a misreading of authority, but Rembrandt complicates this perception by subordinating the lieutenant's flamboyance to the captain's authoritative gesture, even casting the captain's shadow across his subordinate. In doing so, Rembrandt critiques vanity and redirects attention toward the more understated virtues of leadership authority rooted not in ostentation, but in decisive action and the recognition of responsibility. Beyond the interplay of individuals, the Night Watch interrogates the very idea of civic community. Unlike the rigidly posed and hierarchically ordered militia portraits of Rembrandt's contemporaries, this composition stages the militia as a living organism, animated by movement, diversity of roles, and a multiplicity of gazes. Figures emerge from and recede into the darkness, suggesting both the inclusion and marginalization inherent in social structures. The later edition of the shield bearing 18 names underscores the transactional nature of representation, revealing how visibility within the canvas was negotiated according to financial contribution. Thus, the painting functions not only as art but also as a document of patronage, social status, and civic ambition. The subsequent history of the Night Watch's alteration in 1715, its relocations through Amsterdam's civic institutions, and its eventual enshrinement in the Rijksmuseum mirrors the shifting fortunes of Dutch political and cultural identity. The misnomer "the Night Watch," originating in the late 18th century, reflects how reception can reshape a work's meaning. A scene once understood as a celebration of civic pride was reimagined as a mysterious nocturnal vigil. This slippage between original intent and historical reinterpretation highlights the instability of cultural memory and the extent to which artworks accrue layers of significance over time. The Night Watch is more than a civic commission. It is a meditation on the dynamics of authority, the tensions between individuality and collective identity, and the performative nature of public representation. Infusing narrative vitality with psychological depth, Rembrandt not only redefined the group portrait, but also crystallized the paradoxes of a society negotiating between democratic ideals of civic participation and the persistent hierarchies of wealth and status. Its enduring resonance lies precisely in this complexity. The painting stages not merely a militia company preparing to march, but a society contemplating its own image. Concord of the State, 1642, Museum Boijemans van Beuningen, Rotterdam, is a relatively lesser-known but intellectually significant oil-on-panel work by Rembrandt van Rijn. Measuring 74.6 by 101 centimeters, the painting bears the signature and date Rembrandt F. 164, situating it contemporaneously with the Night Watch. This temporal proximity is crucial, for the painting not only shares stylistic affinities with Rembrandt's monumental civic guard portrait, but also reflects the broader ideological concerns of the Dutch Republic at a time of political and cultural consolidation. At its core, Concord of the State presents an allegorical vision of the Dutch Republic's unity. The very term Concord resonates with the 17th century Republican ideal that collective prosperity and stability could only be achieved through civic harmony and mutual obligation. Much like the Night Watch, the painting does not simply depict its subjects in literal terms, but embeds layers of symbolism designed to communicate political meaning to a discerning audience. The allegorical imagery functions as a visual counterpart to the discourses of governance, liberty, and civic responsibility that circulated in Amsterdam during the height of the Republic's golden age. The connection to the Night Watch is particularly illuminating. Whereas the larger canvas dramatizes civic militia as both a literal and symbolic embodiment of Amsterdam's vigilance, Concord of the State operates on a more abstract register, condensing the idea of Concord into emblematic forms. In both works, Rembrandt demonstrates his sensitivity to the political climate of 1642, a year marked not only by artistic achievement, but also by anxieties regarding the durability of the Republic's institutions. The presence of allegory in Concord of the State suggests that Rembrandt was fully aware of the expectation that art should serve not merely as ornament, but as a vehicle for civic ideology. Thematically, the painting can be read as an articulation of the Republic's idealized self-image. The juxtaposition of symbols, possibly including personifications of the provinces, instruments of governance, or emblems of justice, would have resonated with an audience attuned to the language of political allegory. The emphasis on unity amidst diversity also reflects the Republic's paradoxical identity. A federation of semi-autonomous provinces bound together in pursuit of common defense and prosperity. Within this visual framework, the painting becomes a meditation on the fragile balance of Republican concord, as much an exhortation as a celebration. Art historically, Concord of the State illuminates a dimension of Rembrandt's practice that extends beyond portraiture and narrative history into the realm of political allegory. It demonstrates his capacity to adapt painterly technique to ideological content, embedding his rich chiaroscuro and attention to symbolic detail within a framework designed to appeal to civic and intellectual elites. Moreover, its pairing with the Night Watch underscores the breadth of Rembrandt's ambitions in 1642 to align his art with the central political and cultural questions of his time, and to position himself not only as a painter of individuals, but also as an interpreter of the state itself. Thus, Concord of the State stands as a compact but resonant example of Rembrandt's engagement with the allegorical imagination of the Dutch Republic. It complements the grandeur of the Night Watch by distilling the same themes into a symbolic form, thereby reaffirming the centrality of civic unity and political concord to the artistic and ideological discourse of the Dutch Golden Age. David and Jonathan, 1642, Hermitage Museum, St. Petersburg, is an oil painting on oak panel by Rembrandt van Rijn, exemplifying his profound ability to merge biblical narrative with psychological depth. Executed in the same year as The Night Watch and Concord of the State, this work reflects both Rembrandt's mature painterly idiom and his enduring preoccupation with the complexities of human emotion. Its acquisition history is equally notable. Together with the Hellenistic Venus de Taurida, it formed the foundation of the Hermitage's collection when officially inaugurated in 1882. The subject derives from the first book of Samuel, 20:35-42, recounting the final meeting between David and Jonathan, son of King Saul. In this narrative, Jonathan warns his friend of Saul's murderous intentions and advises him to flee. Their parting at the stone easel becomes a scene of heightened pathos, which Rembrandt seizes upon with striking intensity. He depicts David collapsing in grief against Jonathan's chest, while Jonathan, though deeply sorrowful, restrains his own tears. The quiver of arrows at David's feet alludes to Jonathan's earlier gift of arms following David's victory over Goliath, and 1 Samuel 18:1-4, binding this farewell to their covenant of loyalty. In the distant left background, Jerusalem gleams as a reminder of both divine promise and the political tensions underlying the narrative. What distinguishes this work is Rembrandt's psychological insight. The biblical text emphasizes the extraordinary love between the two men, for he loved him as he loved his own soul. 1 Samuel 20:17. And Rembrandt visualizes this sentiment with rare tenderness. The composition pivots less on heroic action than on the intimacy of shared grief, inviting viewers into the private realm of human vulnerability. David's unrestrained tears contrast poignantly with Jonathan's controlled expression, suggesting the duality of emotional release and stoic endurance. In its structure, the painting recalls the devotional format of a pietà, transforming an Old Testament episode into an archetype of sacred sorrow and covenantal love. The painting also acquires a biographical resonance. Completed soon after the death of Saskia, Rembrandt's beloved wife, it is plausible that the artist projected his personal mourning onto the biblical story. Themes of loss, fidelity, and the fragility of human bonds permeate the canvas, underscoring how Rembrandt transformed scriptural narrative into a mirror of universal human experience. At the same time, the inclusion of Jerusalem and the symbolic arrows elevates the work beyond private grief, binding it to broader theological currents of covenant, sacrifice, and divine providence. Modern scholarship has expanded the interpretive field of David and Jonathan. Theologically, it represents Rembrandt's characteristic fusion of spiritual meditation and emotional realism, eschewing Baroque spectacle in favor of psychological immediacy. Culturally, some critics, especially within the framework of queer theory, have viewed the canvas as an image of male-male intimacy that surpasses conventional categories, even if such readings go beyond the painter's explicit intentions. This polyvalence underscores the enduring relevance of the work. It remains both a historical artifact of 17th century Dutch piety and a timeless reflection on love that transcends boundaries of gender, status, or circumstance. Within the Hermitage, David and Jonathan stands alongside other Rembrandt masterpieces, including Flora, 1634, The Sacrifice of Isaac, 1635, The Holy Family with Angels, 1645, and the late return of the Prodigal Son, 1668-1669. Viewed in this broader context, the painting forms part of a continuum through which Rembrandt persistently engaged with themes of love, sacrifice, and reconciliation. Its restrained scale belies its emotional power, positioning it as a vital link between the monumental civic works of the early 1640s and the profound spiritual meditations of his final decade. The Woman Taken in Adultery, 1644, National Gallery, London, is an oil painting on oak panel by Rembrandt. Acquired in 1824 as part of the National Gallery's Foundation collection, it demonstrates the artist's ability to transform a canonical biblical episode into a meditation on justice, mercy, and the fallibility of human judgment. Executed in the mid-1640s, the work belongs to a period when Rembrandt was refining his chiaroscuro idiom to heighten narrative immediacy and psychological depth. The subject derives from the Gospel of John, 8:3-7, where scribes and Pharisees bring before Christ a woman caught in adultery, demanding that he sanction her execution according to Mosaic law. Rather than succumbing to their trap, Jesus utters the disarming command, "He that is without sin among you, let him first cast a stone at her." Rembrandt crystallizes this drama through compositional hierarchy and symbolic illumination. Christ dominates the vertical axis of the scene, rendered taller than surrounding figures and bathed in radiance, while his accusers recede into darkness, their forms compressed and visually subordinated. This contrast between light and shadow becomes not merely optical, but moral, situating divine compassion against human hypocrisy. What distinguishes Rembrandt's interpretation is his resistance to spectacle. Unlike many contemporaneous depictions of the same theme, he withholds overt violence or dramatic gesture. Instead, the scene pivots on stillness, the silent moral force of Christ's words, the quiet humiliation of the accusers, and the trembling vulnerability of the woman. The painting therefore privileges the ethical over the sensational, embodying Rembrandt's sustained concern with the inward dimension of biblical narrative. At a theological level, the composition dramatizes the dialectic between law and grace. The figures of the Pharisees cloaked in shadow stand as representatives of a rigid and punitive religiosity, while Christ, radiating light, embodies the radical alternative of divine mercy. The disproportion of scale Christ enlarged, the others diminished, renders visible this inversion of human judgment by divine truth. Such symbolism is consistent with Rembrandt's broader corpus, where heightened contrasts of illumination often operate as metaphors for revelation. Biographically, the painting can be read against the backdrop of Rembrandt's personal struggles in the 1640s. Having lost his wife Saskia only 2 years prior, he was entering a decade marked by financial pressures and litigation. The somber tonalities and moral gravity of The Woman Taken in Adultery may reflect an artist increasingly attuned to the fragility of human circumstance and the necessity of compassion. In the National Gallery's collection, the work holds a foundational role, not only as one of its earliest acquisitions, but also as a paradigm of Rembrandt's theological humanism. Viewed alongside later works such as The Return of the Prodigal Son, it underscores the artist's lifelong endeavor to transform biblical text into a meditation on forgiveness, humility, and the light that penetrates human darkness. Its restrained scale belies the magnitude of its moral vision, situating it as a pivotal work in the negotiation between divine justice and human frailty. The Holy Family with Angels, 1645, Hermitage Museum, St. Petersburg, is an oil-on canvas by Rembrandt van Rijn that exemplifies the artist's sustained engagement with the biblical narrative through the lens of domestic intimacy. While nominally a depiction of the Nativity, the work diverges from the grandiose iconographic traditions of earlier religious art. Instead, Rembrandt situates the sacred event within the quiet ordinariness of a Dutch household, thereby merging theological mystery with the tactile immediacy of lived experience. At the center of the composition lies the infant Christ, cradled beneath a canopy of firelight, while Mary leans protectively over him, lifting a cloth that both shields and reveals. Joseph, only partially visible in the background, continues his carpentry, his absorbed labor evoking themes of provision and humility. Hovering above, the angels rendered as small, winged boys with outstretched arms express astonishment at the incarnate mystery before them. Their luminous presence, suspended in awe, sets the spiritual register of the scene. Yet they remain integrated into the domestic space, as if the divine was seamlessly interwoven with daily life. Stylistically, the painting demonstrates Rembrandt's mature chiaroscuro technique. The glow of the fire articulates a hierarchy of significance, illuminating the Christ child and Mary's tender gesture while relegating Joseph to semi-darkness. This distribution of light dramatizes the theological claim of incarnation divinity entering the ordinary while simultaneously reinforcing the maternal bond as the locus of revelation. The material textures from the woven cradle to the coarse fabric of Mary's dress are rendered with such precision that the sacred is made palpable, almost tangible. In presenting Mary in the attire of a Dutch peasant, Rembrandt deliberately collapses temporal and cultural distance, inviting his 17th century viewers to encounter the Holy Family as if present among them. The painting also resonates with broader cultural and theological discourses of the Dutch Golden Age. In Protestant contexts where overt Marian devotion was often suppressed, Rembrandt reintroduces Mary not as an exalted queen but as an ordinary mother, embodying virtues of care, humility, and vigilance. This domestic framing underscores a reformed emphasis on the sanctity of household life, while the angels affirm the continuing eruption of divine mystery into human affairs. Thus, the painting performs a subtle reconciliation between Calvinist restraint and the enduring human longing for sacred imagery. On a deeper interpretive level, the Holy Family with Angels can be read as a meditation on vulnerability and protection. Mary's gesture of shielding Christ from the firelight anticipates her lifelong role as guardian of the fragile divine. Joseph's labor, barely noticed in the shadows, becomes a quiet symbol of faithfulness in the face of obscurity. The angel's astonishment reflects humanity's perennial wonder before the paradox of God made flesh. Collectively, these elements situate the work not only as a biblical illustration but also as a philosophical reflection on the interplay of the ordinary and the transcendent. In the Hermitage's collection, the canvas stands in dialogue with other Rembrandt works that interrogate themes of family, suffering, and redemption, most notably David and Jonathan, 1642, and the late return of the Prodigal Son, the 1668–1669. Together, these paintings demonstrate how Rembrandt persistently infused scriptural narrative with psychological realism and domestic immediacy, making theological truths experientially accessible. The Holy Family with angels, modest in scale yet profound in resonance, epitomizes Rembrandt's ability to transform familiar biblical scenes into enduring meditations on love, faith, and the sanctity of everyday life. Around 1647, Rembrandt hired Hendrikje Stoffels, a woman 20 years his junior, to be his maid. She was a simple, gentle person who helped to comfort the artist, and naturally went on to complicate Rembrandt's relationship with Geertje. As explained in The World of Rembrandt 1606, 1669, 1963, evidently, her relationship to Rembrandt very soon changed from that of servant to model to wife in all but name, and she remained with him until her death at 37 in 1663. Hendrikje had 2 daughters with Rembrandt, one who died as an infant, but the younger one, Cornelia, was healthy. Rembrandt seemed sustained by Hendrikje and his son Titus, with whom he was delighted. Maturity was bringing more calmness and wisdom to his life and art. He would go on to paint masterpiece after masterpiece. However, Rembrandt's Baroque style slowly fell out of public favor due to a change in Dutch tastes for art, a fondness for drama, elegance, bright colors, and graceful manners developed as seen in the work of the fashionable Flemish artist Anthony van Dyck. Although he desperately needed commissions, Rembrandt would not compromise his art. His work became quieter and more profound. Another reason for his decline in popularity may have been his continued dedication to biblical themes. In the mid-1640s, he was one of a few Dutch artists still interpreting the scriptures, and there were not many commissions. During the 17th century, the Dutch favored landscapes of many types: canals, dunes, panoramas of towns, views of the sea or woods, and wintry or moonlit scenes. Rembrandt used the medium of oil paint to express his more imaginative concepts of nature. He reserved his realism in landscapes almost entirely for etchings and drawings, as was noted in The World of Rembrandt 1606 and in 1669. Rembrandt's interest in landscape painting lasted through the next 2 decades. A series of drawings and etchings show his keen observation of nature, great originality in composition, and marvelous economy of forms. 19th century connoisseurs considered Rembrandt's painting of The Mill, 1645–48, to be one of the master's greatest creations. It has all the characteristics of having been painted from life, although it probably was not, since that was rare in 17th century Dutch landscape. The collectors and critics celebrated the dramatic silhouette of the mill against a dark, stormy sky and attributed the heavy atmosphere to Rembrandt's frame of mind when he encountered severe financial difficulties. Painted around 1650, the mill stands among the most evocative and poetic landscapes attributed to Rembrandt. Now housed in the National Gallery of Art, Washington, D.C., the painting occupies a singular place within the master's oeuvre, not only for its atmospheric grandeur, but also for the long-standing debate surrounding its authorship. Once doubted, later reinstated, and still not unanimously accepted, the work continues to invite contemplation on the very nature of Rembrandt's artistic identity, his sensitivity to light, tone, and the metaphysical resonance of the Dutch landscape. The composition reveals a windmill perched upon the circular escarpment of a ruined bastion, rising above a tranquil moat. Below, daily life unfolds with quiet modesty. A woman washes linen at the water's edge. A man stands watch. Another pushes a barrow, and a ferry glides across the river's calm surface. Yet these small human figures seem almost incidental to the vast, enveloping drama of nature and light that dominates the canvas. The mill itself, central and monumental, commands the scene with solemn dignity. Its sails etched sharply against the evening sky. The fading rays of the sun illuminate half the heavens, bathing the mill in a radiant glow that seems to oscillate between illumination and shadow, life and transience. Rembrandt's mastery of tonal design reaches an almost musical harmony in this work. The windmill's 4 vanes, each rendered with a distinct tonal contrast light against dark, dark against light, dark against dark, and light against light form a subtle meditation on balance and perception. This interplay of value does more than organize the pictorial structure. It becomes a philosophical statement on the relativity of light itself. In this sense, the mill transforms the Dutch landscape into a theatre of vision, where contrasts of tone embody the eternal flux between clarity and obscurity, revelation and mystery. While the painting can be read as a realistic depiction of rural Holland, its mood transcends the literal. The somber sky, the melancholy stillness of the water, and the isolated silhouette of the windmill evoke a profound meditation on human endurance and solitude. The windmill, once a familiar symbol of labor and sustenance, here assumes almost spiritual significance. Elevated above the earth, it becomes a sentinel over time and nature, turning its sails in the dying light like a memento of man's perseverance amidst the vast, mutable forces of creation. In the context of Rembrandt's broader artistic concerns, the mill reveals his continuing fascination with the moral dimension of light. The chiaroscuro here is not mere technique but moral metaphor. Light touches the human and the natural with equal reverence, dignifying even the humblest detail. The figures by the water are bathed in the same divine illumination as the sky itself, a visual theology that binds the earthly and the eternal. Through this synthesis of the physical and spiritual, Rembrandt converts landscape painting, a genre traditionally regarded as secondary, into a vehicle of metaphysical reflection. Throughout its history, the mill has elicited a range of interpretations and attributions, from Cornelis Hofstede de Groot's early 20th century catalogue to later debates about its authenticity. Whether by Rembrandt's own hand or a close pupil, The painting's enduring power lies in its capacity to embody the essence of his vision, the union of light and matter, the dignity of work and solitude, and the trembling equilibrium between human fragility and divine infinity. In its restrained palette and solemn beauty, the mill stands as one of the most haunting testaments to the contemplative spirit of the Dutch Golden Age. Painted in 1647, Susanna and the Elders represents one of Rembrandt van Rijn's most profound meditations on innocence, corruption, and the human condition. Executed in oil on a Peltegien panel, now housed in the Gemäldegallerie Berlin, the work revisits the deuterocanonical episode from the Book of Daniel A narrative that had long captivated European artists for its moral and erotic tensions. In Rembrandt's hands, however, the familiar story of voyeurism and virtue is transformed into a deeply psychological drama, stripped of theatricality and rendered instead with humane restraint and moral gravity. The story tells of Susanna, a virtuous woman secretly spied upon by two elders while bathing in her garden. When she rejects their advances, they threaten to accuse her falsely of adultery, a crime punishable by death. Ultimately, she is vindicated through the intervention of the prophet Daniel, who exposes their deceit. This tale, oscillating between peril and redemption, offered Baroque artists a pretext for exploring the female nude under the guise of moral narrative. Yet Rembrandt diverges decisively from the sensual conventions of his contemporaries. Where artists such as Tintoretto, Rubens, or Guido Reni often emphasized physical allure and dramatic chiaroscuro, Rembrandt reorients the viewer's gaze towards Susanna's emotional reality. At the core of the composition is not erotic display but moral introspection. Susanna, caught in the instant of violation, crouches to cover herself, her body twisting in instinctive shame and alarm. Her expression, half terror, half dignity, becomes the axis upon which the entire scene turns. The two elders emerge from the shadows, their presence felt more as a psychological intrusion than as compositional spectacle. Through this economy of gesture, Rembrandt achieves a startling intimacy. The viewer feels not like an external spectator, but an unwilling witness to Susanna's humiliation. The vulnerability of her pose, the tactile rendering of flesh under cold light, and the proximity of the figures together create a disquieting sense of moral complicity. Technical evidence reinforces the intensity of Rembrandt's engagement with this subject. X-radiographic analysis reveals that the Berlin panel underwent multiple revisions. Beneath the surface lies an earlier, rougher composition typical of his works from the 1630s. This palimpsest of paint layers attests to the artist's evolving approach, from an initially turbulent conception to the later, more serene and psychologically concentrated form we see today. His reworking of posture, light and spatial balance suggests a deliberate move away from overt drama toward inner tension. In this process, Rembrandt drew inspiration from Susanna and the Elders by his teacher Peter Lastman, whose version he once copied in a drawing. Yet where Lastman dramatized the narrative through rhetoric and gesture, Rembrandt distills it into quiet revelation. This transformation reflects a broader shift in Rembrandt's mature style and inward turn toward the spiritual dimensions of human experience. The calm, golden tonality that suffuses the scene tempers its moral violence, offering instead a vision of purity under siege. Light plays across Susanna's skin not as sensual illumination but as divine vindication, sanctifying her defiance. The contrast between her luminous body and the shadowed elders underscores the moral polarity of truth and deceit, chastity and corruption. In this sense, Susanna and the elders becomes an allegory of moral endurance, one that transcends its biblical origin to speak of the eternal struggle between innocence and power. The painting's provenance adds further texture to its history. Sold in 1647 for 500 guilders to the merchant Adrian Bank, it later passed into the collection of Sir Joshua Reynolds, the eminent English painter and first president of the Royal Academy. This lineage underscores its lasting impact on artists and collectors alike, who recognized in it not merely a biblical narrative, but a moral vision rendered with painterly authority. In Susanna and the Elders, Rembrandt unites narrative, psychology, and technique into a composition of rare integrity. Eschewing the theatricality of the Baroque, he finds in a moment of shame a revelation of truth. The scene, poised between innocence and accusation, becomes an emblem of his artistic creed. That true painting lies not in embellishment, but in the revelation of the soul. Through Susanna's quiet strength and the painting's subdued radiance, Rembrandt achieves what few before him had dared to show, that beauty and virtue are inseparable, and that the most profound form of heroism may be found in silent resistance. Painted in 1648, the head of Christ stands among Rembrandt's most contemplative and spiritually resonant works. Executed in oil on a small oak panel, now housed in the Gemälde Gallery, Berlin, the painting forms part of a series of devotional heads of Christ that the artist produced during the late 1640s. These works mark a profound departure from traditional European depictions of the Savior, signaling a new humanized approach to sacred imagery that reflects Rembrandt's mature vision of faith and humanity. In contrast to the idealized, often hieratic portrayals of Christ that dominated Renaissance and Counter-Reformation art, Rembrandt presents a tender, intimate figure one that seems less a divine abstraction than a living presence. The young man, with his softly curling hair, olive-toned complexion, and downcast gaze, is modeled after a Jewish sitter from Amsterdam's Sephardic community. This choice, revolutionary for its time, reveals Rembrandt's commitment to verisimilitude and his effort to reconnect the Christian image with its historical and cultural origins. By doing so, he not only grounds the sacred in the real, but also imbues the portrait with an unprecedented sense of empathy and introspection. The painting's quiet power derives largely from its simplicity. Christ's head emerges from a dark, indeterminate background, illuminated by a gentle, diffused light that caresses his features and bathes his face in a warm radiance. The downward glance and the slight turn of the head suggest inward reflection, rather than outward authority, a moment of silent communion rather than celestial command. Unlike the triumphant Christ of earlier iconography, Rembrandt's figure is profoundly human, his expression marked by humility, fatigue, and compassion. This transformation of divinity into empathy epitomizes the artist's late spiritual realism. Technically, the head of Christ demonstrates Rembrandt's mastery of tonal subtlety and his unique ability to evoke the immaterial through the material. The restrained palette dominated by muted browns, ochres, and golden glazes creates an atmosphere of sacred intimacy. The soft impasto of the highlights, particularly around the forehead and cheekbones, animates the surface with a living warmth. The brushwork is economical yet deeply expressive. Every stroke seems to serve the purpose of rendering inner life rather than external detail. Through this balance of light and substance, Rembrandt achieves a vision of sanctity that is neither theatrical nor distant, but tenderly accessible. Scholars have long debated the purpose of Rembrandt's Heads of Christ series, of which several versions survive in Berlin, Philadelphia, New York, and Detroit. Some regard them as personal devotional studies, rather than formal commissions, perhaps intended for the artist's private contemplation or for close friends and patrons who shared his introspective piety. The repeated exploration of the same theme, each slightly varied in lighting and expression, suggests that Rembrandt was less interested in narrative than in the meditation of presence, the idea of encountering the divine through the human face. In the Head of Christ, Rembrandt distilled his lifelong inquiry into faith, perception, and humanity. Gone are the elaborate compositions, the narrative gestures, and the theological grandeur of his earlier biblical scenes. What remains is a solitary face, suffused with inward light, a vision of divinity that emanates from compassion rather than power. The work stands as a spiritual manifesto of the mature artist, that truth resides not in splendor, but in sincerity, not in perfection, but in the profound dignity of the human soul. The Kitchen Maid, 1651, an oil-on-canvas painting by the Dutch master Rembrandt, stands as a quiet yet profound testament to the artist's ability to elevate the ordinary to the sublime. Created during the mature phase of his career, this work belongs to the Dutch Golden Age, yet departs from its often ornate celebration of material prosperity to focus instead on the spiritual and psychological depth of everyday existence. In this modest depiction of a servant girl absorbed in her domestic duties, Rembrandt achieves a deeply human vision that resonates with his enduring fascination for humility, light, and the sacredness of the commonplace. The historical context of The Kitchen Maid is closely tied to Rembrandt's later years, a period marked by both financial decline and artistic introspection. By 1651, the artist had distanced himself from the decorative exuberance of his earlier Amsterdam commissions, turning inward to explore the quiet dignity of working-class life. The domestic servant was a familiar motif in Dutch painting, treated by contemporaries like Vermeer and Pieter de Hooch, with an emphasis on compositional order and luminous serenity. Yet unlike the polite and idealized maids of those painters, Rembrandt's figure emerges not as an emblem of household virtue, but as a real person, earthy, contemplative, and dignified in her labor. In this sense, The Kitchen Maid reflects both a humanist impulse and a profound empathy toward the lower classes that distinguished Rembrandt from many of his peers. The composition of the painting is striking in its restraint. The maid occupies a humble interior, her form turned slightly away from the viewer as she leans toward a table, engaged in some unseen task. The subdued color palette, dominated by warm browns, ochres, and muted yellows, envelops her figure in an atmosphere of intimacy and silence. Rembrandt's mastery of chiaroscuro transforms the commonplace scene into an almost devotional image. The fall of light upon the maid's face and hands seems to reveal an inner life of thoughtfulness and quiet strength. The viewer's gaze is drawn not to the object of her labor, but to the moral weight of her presence, suspended between physical toil and spiritual grace. In terms of technique, The Kitchen Maid reveals Rembrandt's late manner marked by loose, textured brushwork and a subtle blending of tones that sacrifices surface polish for expressive depth. The thick impasto of the paint captures the tactile reality of fabric and flesh, while the rough, uneven application conveys the immediacy of perception rather than the illusion of perfection. This painterly freedom, so different from the smooth finishes of Dutch contemporaries, reflects Rembrandt's belief that truth in art resided not in decorative finish, but in the revelation of character and inner life. His manipulation of light, soft, golden, and directional suggests both physical illumination and spiritual insight, elevating the act of labor into a moment of quiet revelation. Interpretively, the painting can be read as a meditation on humility and devotion. The Kitchen Maid, absorbed in her work, becomes an emblem of moral virtue through simple action, recalling Protestant ideals that equated honest labor with spiritual grace. There is no narrative, no gesture toward allegory or mythology. Instead, Rembrandt transforms a private moment into a universal reflection on human dignity. Her downward gaze, the quiet curve of her posture, and the enveloping shadows all suggest an inner calm that borders on the sacred. In this sense, The Kitchen Maid may be viewed as a counterpart to Rembrandt's religious works, transposing the sacred from the realm of saints and prophets into the daily life of the humble and unseen. The legacy of The Kitchen Maid lies in its profound influence on later conceptions of realism and psychological portraiture. It anticipates the moral seriousness and empathy that would characterize 19th century genre painting, from Jean-François Millet to the realism of the Hague School. Within Rembrandt's own oeuvre, the work stands as a quiet culmination of his lifelong search for truth through light and humanity. Now housed in the National Museum in Stockholm, the painting remains a luminous testament to Rembrandt's faith in the redemptive power of the ordinary, wherein a simple maid, touched by light, becomes a vessel of enduring grace and silent majesty. The Descent from the Cross, 1650-1652, attributed to an unknown painter from Rembrandt's workshop, stands as a testament to the collaborative and pedagogical atmosphere surrounding the Dutch master's studio in mid-17th century Amsterdam. Now housed in the National Gallery of Art in Washington, this oil-on canvas encapsulates the intersection between Rembrandt's compositional genius and the interpretive execution of his pupils, most notably Constantijn van Rijn, who is often suggested as the painter of the final work. Although the hand that applied the paint may not be Rembrandt's own, the design bears unmistakable traces of his direction. The pyramidal composition, the interplay of light and shadow, and the emotional gravity of the scene all point toward Rembrandt's intellectual authorship. It is believed that he may have sketched or directly outlined the composition on the canvas, leaving its realization to one of his students. The result is a fascinating hybrid image steeped in Rembrandt's vision, yet filtered through the sensibilities of a young artist still learning the expressive vocabulary of his master. The scene itself, Christ's body being lowered from the cross, has been a central subject in Christian iconography since the Renaissance. In this workshop rendition, the pathos of the moment is rendered with a subdued intensity. The limp body of Christ, bathed in a soft, descending light, contrasts with the shadowed figures who carefully bear his weight. The gestures are solemn, deliberate, and reverent, while the surrounding darkness emphasizes the theological and emotional core of the composition, the triumph of sacrifice over death. While the brushwork lacks the dense impasto and nuanced chiaroscuro that characterize Rembrandt's mature works, the painting nonetheless conveys a genuine sense of spiritual gravity. The faces of the mourners, though less psychologically complex than those in Rembrandt's own interpretations, still express quiet anguish and devotion. The limited color palette dominated by earthy browns, muted ochres, and soft whites reinforces the somber tone, creating a unified atmosphere of mourning and transcendence. This descent from the cross not only reveals the method by which Rembrandt instructed his pupils, but also underscores the workshop's emphasis on understanding emotion through structure and light. Van Rijn and others in Rembrandt's circle were trained to internalize the master's dramatic sensibility while experimenting with their own technical approaches. The painting thus becomes both a devotional image and a record of artistic apprenticeship, marking the transmission of vision from teacher to student. Viewed within the broader Rembrandt tradition, the painting exemplifies how the master's influence extended beyond his own hand to shape a generation of artists who carried his ideals into their own works. The anonymous or semi-collaborative nature of this descent speaks to the collective enterprise of 17th century art making, where genius could be both individual and shared. Though not a Rembrandt in the strictest sense, it remains profoundly Rembrandt-esque in conception and echo of his meditations on suffering, redemption, and the divine humanity of Christ. Saul and David, 1651-1658, attributed to Rembrandt van Rijn and/or his studio, stands among the most psychologically charged of the master's late religious works. Now housed in the Mauritshuis in The Hague, the painting interprets one of the most tragic relationships in the Old Testament, the tormented King Saul and the youthful David, whose harp playing alone can soothe the monarch's spiritual anguish. Though its authorship remains debated, with evidence suggesting participation from Rembrandt's assistants, the composition's emotional gravity, chiaroscuro, and narrative subtlety unmistakably reflect the guiding hand of Rembrandt himself. Drawn from 1 Samuel 16:14-23 and 1 Samuel 18:8-11, the scene portrays Saul at the moment of inner disquiet, tormented by the evil spirit that God has sent to him after the Holy Spirit's departure. His head, heavy with sorrow, rests in his hand as tears glisten under Rembrandt's subdued light. Opposite him, David sits in calm concentration, plucking the harp with a gesture of compassion and restraint. The contrast between the king's spiritual desolation and the youth's serenity encapsulates the duality of divine punishment and divine grace, a recurring theme in Rembrandt's late biblical works. The psychological tension within the painting is heightened by the artist's use of light as moral metaphor. The soft illumination that caresses David's face and instrument signifies purity and divine favor, while Saul remains enveloped in shadow, a visual manifestation of spiritual abandonment. The close proximity of the figures, nearly touching, creates an atmosphere of oppressive intimacy, as if the viewer is drawn into the tragic emotional current binding both men. Technically, the work demonstrates the evolution of Rembrandt's late style. A looser brushstroke, a deep and tonally unified palette, and a preference for emotional suggestion over narrative detail. Yet, the presence of workshop intervention, perhaps in areas of David's face or the drapery, introduces a slight inconsistency in execution. Even so, these variations underscore the collaborative nature of Rembrandt's studio, where students were encouraged to emulate the master's psychological realism while interpreting their assigned passages. The painting's 19th century history adds another layer of poignancy. At some point during that century, the canvas was cut into two unequal parts, perhaps to be sold separately, reflecting a disregard for its compositional unity. The pieces were later rejoined, restoring the dramatic and emotional continuity of the original vision. The scars of this separation remain visible upon close inspection, serving as both literal and metaphorical evidence of fragmentation and reconciliation, a fate not unlike that of its subjects. In its present state, Saul and David remains a masterful exploration of spiritual affliction and redemptive music, balancing human fragility with divine intervention. Whether executed entirely by Rembrandt or completed by his studio under his design, the work stands as an enduring meditation on the limits of faith and the solace of art. Its quiet, somber power continues to affirm Rembrandt's preeminence as the supreme interpreter of the human soul. Aristotle with a bust of Homer, also known as Aristotle contemplating a bust of Homer, is an oil-on-canvas painting created by Rembrandt in 1663 for Don Antonio Ruffo, a Sicilian nobleman and art collector. The work is currently housed in the Metropolitan Museum of Art, New York. The painting depicts the ancient Greek philosopher Aristotle resting his right hand upon a bust of Homer, the legendary poet, while wearing a gold chain, a medallion, a gift from Alexander the Great, one of his most famous pupils. The contrast between Aristotle's rich garments and Homer's plain sculpted likeness evokes a dialogue between worldly honor and intellectual virtue, between material wealth and spiritual wisdom. Executed during Rembrandt's mature period, the work is celebrated for its subdued palette, atmospheric light, and profound psychological depth. Rather than idealizing the philosopher, Rembrandt portrays him in quiet contemplation, his gaze downward, as if weighed by the transience of fame and the immortality of art and thought. The painting's interpretation remains open, with art historians debating whether Rembrandt intended to express the philosopher's melancholy, his reverence for poetic genius, or the tension between power and intellect. Nevertheless, it stands as one of the artist's most introspective masterpieces, an embodiment of philosophical reflection rendered through light and shadow. Painted around 1654, Woman Bathing, also known as A Woman Bathing in a Stream, belongs to Rembrandt's late period, a time marked by his profound introspection and psychological depth. The work was acquired by the National Gallery, London, in 1831 and has since been considered one of the most intimate and emotionally resonant portrayals of the artist's mature years. This painting exemplifies Rembrandt's rejection of the idealized classicism that dominated mid-17th century art. Instead, he embraced an unflinching realism that revealed the emotional and spiritual truth of his subjects. The woman, thought to be Hendrikia Stoffel's Rembrandt's companion, embodies a quiet authenticity far removed from the mythological perfection favored by his contemporaries. Rendered with broad, fluid brushstrokes and an earthy palette, the composition conveys a sense of immediacy and natural warmth. The figure, barefoot and partially clothed, lifts her garments as she steps into the water. The soft illumination focuses on her skin, creating a dialogue between light and shadow that heightens her physical presence while suggesting an inner vulnerability. The surrounding darkness isolates her form, transforming an everyday act of bathing into a moment of quiet transcendence. The painting has often been read as an expression of purity and introspection rather than sensuality. Some scholars have identified the subject as the nymph Callisto, surprised while bathing apart from Diana's attendants. However, the absence of mythological attributes points instead to Rembrandt's desire to depict a profoundly human experience, an intimate encounter between body, light, and water, revealing both physical realism and spiritual calm. Woman bathing has been celebrated as one of Rembrandt's most innovative and spontaneous works. Its loose, painterly execution inspired later generations of artists, particularly the Impressionists, who admired his capacity to capture life's immediacy with emotional depth. The painting's raw honesty and disregard for ideal beauty underscore Rembrandt's enduring influence on modern realism. Art historian Gary Schwartz described the work as an oil sketch, enlarged to the dimensions of a full-scale painting, a phrase that captures its vitality and experimental freedom. Indeed, Woman Bathing stands among Rembrandt's freshest and most original compositions, a testament to his mastery in transforming an ordinary private moment into a profound reflection on humanity itself. Painted in 1656 and now housed in the National Gallery, London, Portrait of Hendrikje Stoffels captures the deep emotional and personal connection between Rembrandt and his longtime companion. Hendrikje entered Rembrandt's household in 1647 as a maid, but soon became his lover and partner, remaining with him until her death in 1663. Their relationship, unconventional for the time, led to Hendrikje being summoned before the church council for living in sin with the painter, resulting in her suspension from communion. Despite these social and religious reprimands, the couple's bond endured, marked by loyalty and quiet defiance against societal judgment. This portrait exemplifies Rembrandt's late style, distinguished by broader, looser brushwork and a mastery of tonal harmony that conveys both psychological insight and physical presence. The artist's treatment of light envelops Hendrikje in a subdued glow, softening her features and drawing attention to the contemplative warmth of her expression. Her face emerges from the dark background with a serene dignity that transcends the merely descriptive, embodying the quiet intimacy of a private world shared between painter and sitter. Rembrandt's depiction of Hendrikje avoids idealization, revealing instead a profound sense of humanity. Her gentle gaze, directed slightly downward, and the subtle gesture of her hand disappearing into her fur robe evoke tenderness and vulnerability. The restrained palette rich in earth tones and deep shadow enhances the sense of introspection, while the textured handling of paint imbues the work with a living immediacy. Though deeply personal, the painting also resonates with universal emotional depth. Hendrikje is not merely a subject of affection. She becomes an emblem of quiet strength, enduring love, and acceptance amid hardship. The painting thus transcends portraiture to become an exploration of compassion and shared endurance, qualities that define Rembrandt's mature artistic vision. In the broader arc of Rembrandt's oeuvre, this portrait marks a turning point towards spiritual realism. It stands as a testament to his lifelong quest to depict truth through the play of light and shadow, not as moral contrast, but as the texture of human experience itself. The warmth and empathy radiating from Hendrikje's face embody the essence of Rembrandt's late works, where technique serves emotion, and every brushstroke becomes a pulse of life. Art critics have long admired the portrait for its quiet intimacy and psychological richness. Its informality and naturalism distinguish it from traditional commissioned portraits of the 17th century, suggesting a relationship of deep trust between artist and sitter. The result is one of Rembrandt's most personal and moving portrayals, a meditation on love, resilience, and the human spirit, rendered with the timeless compassion that defines his art. Completed in 1654, Bathsheba at her bath stands among Rembrandt's most profound and psychologically complex works. Housed in the Louvre, this oil on canvas reimagines the biblical story from 2 Samuel 11, in which King David, struck by Bathsheba's beauty, orchestrates her husband's death to claim her as his own. Yet rather than sensationalize the scene or render it as voyeuristic spectacle as many of his predecessors had done, Rembrandt centers the viewer's gaze on Bathsheba herself, transforming a tale of sin and desire into an intimate meditation on conscience, vulnerability, and fate. The model for Bathsheba is widely believed to be Hendrikje Stoffels, Rembrandt's companion and muse during this period. Her presence infuses the image with emotional authenticity, elevating it beyond moral narrative to personal reflection. Seated in stillness, Bathsheba holds David's letter, her gaze turned inward, the weight of her moral dilemma palpable. The artist's subtle modulation of light caressing her flesh with a golden radiance that contrasts against the somber background creates a dialogue between sensuality and sorrow. Rembrandt's treatment of the nude here marks a departure from idealized classical forms. The body is rendered with truth rather than perfection, full, warm, and human. Each brushstroke conveys both physical immediacy and inner tension. The rich textures of paint thickly laid in the flesh tones and softly diffused in the shadows enhance the tactile presence of the figure while suggesting an atmosphere of quiet contemplation. More than an illustration of scripture, the painting becomes a study of moral solitude. Bathsheba's expression resists simple interpretation, neither guilt nor innocence, but an uneasy awareness of consequence. Her introspection replaces the dramatic action of the biblical account. Rembrandt captures not the act, but the thought before the act. This psychological realism, rare in 17th century art, endows the work with timeless emotional resonance. The painting's composition, tight, cropped, and inward, reflects Rembrandt's late stylistic maturity. The space is compressed, the light concentrated, and the narrative distilled to its essential human moment. Through this visual economy, the artist achieves a kind of sacred intimacy that transforms the biblical into the universal. The story of a woman confronting the weight of desire and destiny. Art critics have long hailed Bathsheba at her bath as one of the pinnacles of Western painting. Kenneth Clark called it Rembrandt's greatest painting of the nude, praising its union of sensuality and moral gravity. Its empathy and insight into the female condition reveal the artist's unmatched capacity to depict not just appearance but soul. In Bathsheba's quiet melancholy, Rembrandt achieves a balance of passion and pity, an image of human frailty illuminated by divine light. Painted around the 1650s, the Polish Rider remains one of the most enigmatic works traditionally attributed to Rembrandt. Now housed in the Frick collection in New York, the painting depicts a young man on horseback traversing a shadowed, indeterminate landscape. The rider's attire, an exotic blend of Eastern European and military dress paired with his contemplative expression, evokes both chivalric romance and quiet introspection. Although the painting was long accepted as an authentic Rembrandt, questions regarding its authorship and subject have persisted, adding to its enduring aura of mystery. The identity of the rider has been a source of speculation for centuries. Some scholars have proposed that he represents a specific historical figure, perhaps a Polish nobleman such as Lisawczyk cavalry officer, or even a young emissary. Others interpret him as an allegorical figure, a personification of courage, youth, or the journey of the soul. Yet Rembrandt's interest in psychological depth suggests that the work may transcend portraiture altogether, offering instead a meditation on solitude, destiny, and the human passage through an uncertain world. Stylistically, the painting bears the hallmarks of Rembrandt's late manner: subdued tonality, broad brushwork, and a masterful command of chiaroscuro. The light falls unevenly upon the rider, illuminating his youthful face and pale cloak while leaving the landscape in near obscurity. This interplay of radiance and shadow heightens the emotional tension, situating the figure between the known and the unknown, a liminal space that mirrors the painting's own interpretive ambiguity. The background, rendered with sketch-like freedom, reinforces this sense of transience. The vague horizon, the indistinct vegetation, and the muted palette all evoke a world fading into mist. Unlike the heroic equestrian portraits of his contemporaries, Rembrandt's rider is not triumphant, but contemplative. His posture, slightly forward yet restrained, implies motion without urgency, a spiritual rather than physical journey. Throughout his career, Rembrandt often returned to themes of inner struggle and revelation. The Polish rider can be seen as an extension of this vision, a portrait not of nobility or conquest, but of the human condition itself. The rider's quiet resolve amid the encroaching darkness reflects the artist's profound understanding of the tension between faith and uncertainty, courage and isolation. Art critics have long admired the painting's haunting beauty and psychological subtlety. Whether by Rembrandt himself or a close pupil from his circle, it stands as a testament to the spiritual depth of the Dutch master's influence. As Henry Frick's most beloved acquisition, the Polish rider continues to invite contemplation, a solitary traveler whose destination remains forever just beyond the horizon. Painted in 1655, Slaughtered Ox stands among the most visceral and enigmatic works of Rembrandt's late period. Now housed in the Louvre, the painting depicts the carcass of a bull or ox, suspended by its hind legs in a dim wooden interior. The image is both literal and symbolic, an unflinching study of flesh and mortality rendered with Rembrandt's unparalleled sensitivity to light and texture. Though the subject may seem purely utilitarian, the composition transcends the genre of still life to reach a level of spiritual and existential resonance rarely achieved in Western art. The painting continues a Northern European tradition of butchery scenes, following works such as Peter Aertsen's A Meat Stall, with the Holy Family giving alms, and Annibale Carracci's Butcher's Shop. Yet Rembrandt diverges from his predecessors by stripping the scene of anecdote or moralizing detail. His ox is monumental and solitary, its form dominating the composition with a sculptural gravity. The raw red tones of the flesh contrast sharply with the dark recesses of the interior, where a small, barely visible woman peers from behind a half-open door, a subtle intrusion of life into a scene of death. Formally, Rembrandt's command of chiaroscuro transforms the carcass into an almost sacred object. The fall of light across the animal's flayed body articulates every tendon and muscle, while the rough brushwork conveys both the tactile substance of the meat and the emotional intensity of the artist's gaze. The vertical hanging of the ox, arms splayed and ribcage exposed, unmistakably recalls the crucifixion, a visual echo of sacrifice and redemption. The painting thus occupies a liminal space between still life and religious allegory, between the corporeal and the transcendent. Thematically, Slaughtered Ox has been read as a meditation on mortality and suffering, a vanitas image that transforms a butcher's carcass into a symbol of human fragility. In the Christian tradition, the slaughtered beast evokes the fatted calf of the Prodigal Son parable, and by extension, Christ's sacrifice for humanity. Yet Rembrandt's treatment remains ambiguous. There is no overt narrative, no sentimentality, only the stark confrontation of flesh, time, and decay. The woman's presence, understated yet deliberate, heightens the realism while also suggesting a quiet witness to death, or perhaps to renewal. This work also reflects Rembrandt's artistic and personal condition during the 1650s. Bankrupt, socially isolated and deeply introspective, he found in the raw immediacy of flesh a mirror for his own humanity. The ox's massive body, rendered with unflinching honesty, may be read as both a symbol of endurance and a reflection of the artist's existential struggle, painting as an act of confrontation with mortality itself. Art critics have long regarded Slaughtered Ox as one of Rembrandt's most profound statements. Its influence spans centuries, inspiring artists such as Eugène Delacroix, Honoré Daumier, Chaim Soutine, and Francis Bacon, the latter transforming the image into the haunting figure with meat. Through its monumental simplicity and emotional gravity, Slaughtered Ox endures not merely as a study of anatomy, but as a meditation on the human condition, a work where matter and spirit, death and transcendence, coexist within the same trembling light. Painted in 1656, the anatomy lesson of Dr. Daeman occupies a singular and unsettling place within Rembrandt's oeuvre. Conceived as a grand successor to his famed anatomy lesson of Dr. Tulp of 1632, the work originally presented a full group portrait of Amsterdam surgeons witnessing a dissection. Only a fragment survives today, the rest lost to fire in 1723. Yet what remains retains extraordinary dramatic force. The scene captures Dr. Jan Dijman and his assistant Gijsbert Kalkoen engaged in the delicate opening of the skull of an executed criminal, Joris Black Jan Fontaine. It is a study not simply in anatomy but in mortality, justice, and the solemn pursuit of knowledge. Rembrandt, then in the later and financially troubled stage of his career, approached the subject with a profound psychological gravity that exceeded conventional civic portraiture. Where earlier anatomy portraits emphasized professional honor and civic virtue, this painting delves into darkness, literally and figuratively. The focus narrows to the body and the two surgeons, transforming the ceremony of medical learning into a quiet meditation on the boundary between life and death. In the Amsterdam of the mid-17th century, anatomical dissections were both scientific demonstrations and moral reckonings, linking public scholarship with the punishment of crime. Rembrandt honors the tradition yet pushes it toward interiority and mystery. Visually, the painting is striking for its dramatic foreshortening of the cadaver, reminiscent of Andrea Mantegna's Lamentation of Christ. The body lies with unnerving immediacy, its forehead split, its skull lifted, its position forcing viewers into the space of the dissection table. Thick shadows envelop the figures while light falls starkly upon exposed flesh, creating both clinical clarity and spiritual solemnity. The assistant's gesture, holding the removed skull cap, contrasts with the concentration of Dr. Dijman, whose hands delicately probe the brain. Rembrandt's brushwork is bold and textured, lending tactile presence to skin, cloth, and bone. The composition is compact, almost sculptural, heightening the intimacy of this moment of scientific inquiry. Thematically, the painting meditates on knowledge acquired through mortality. The criminal's body, once a living presence capable of moral transgression, becomes a vessel for learning, a reminder that human frailty and human understanding are intertwined. The corpse of Joris Fontaine carries narrative weight. A tailor turned delinquent, executed for violent theft. His remains made available to the surgeons as both punishment and public moral lesson. Yet Rembrandt avoids caricature. The cadaver, stripped of identity and history, evokes universal vulnerability. Justice and anatomy converge, but so do compassion and solemn respect. This work reflects broader currents in Rembrandt's late style. an intensification of emotion, a willingness to leave passages unfinished, and a profound inwardness. Here, the painter shows little interest in superficial likenesses or civic display. Instead, he invites contemplation of mortality and the pursuit of truth through direct confrontation with the human body. The tragedy of its partial survival deepens its aura. What remains feels like a relic of an artistic statement that once extended beyond the edges of the surviving canvas. Critics regard the fragment as a haunting testament to Rembrandt's late genius. Though incomplete, it encapsulates his mastery of light, psychological presence, and spiritual depth. It stands at the intersection of art, science, and morality. A work where the pursuit of knowledge is shadowed by human destiny. If the earlier anatomy lesson of Dr. Tulp celebrates civic pride, the anatomy lesson of Dr. Diamond confronts existential truth. In its severe beauty and solemn intimacy, it remains one of the most profound meditations on life and death in Western art. Painted in 1656, Jacob blessing the sons of Joseph stands as one of Rembrandt's most profound meditations on faith, lineage, and divine mystery. Commissioned by Amsterdam patrician Willem Schrijver, the work transforms the donor and his family into biblical figures, merging sacred narrative with personal devotion, a common practice among elite patrons, yet here executed with exceptional emotional gravity. The canvas depicts the moment from Genesis 48, when the dying patriarch Jacob blesses Joseph's sons, Ephraim and Manasseh, but crosses his hands to favor the younger, defying tradition and earthly expectation. Within the social and cultural milieu of the Dutch Golden Age, this subject carried resonant themes: the authority of divine will over human hierarchy and the sanctity of family legacy. Rembrandt, deeply attuned to both biblical drama and human frailty, renders the scene not as formal ceremony but as intimate revelation. The patron's decision to appear with his wife Wendela de Graef and children in sacred guise underscores the intersection of religious faith, civic status, and familial pride in 17th century Amsterdam. Visually, the painting demonstrates Rembrandt's late-period mastery of chiaroscuro and velvety impasto, described by scholars as achieving a sculptural surface with a translucent glaze. Figures emerge from shadow in a warm, glowing palette of ochres, siennas, and rich reds, creating an atmosphere at once domestic and sacred. Jacob's crossed arms form the emotional fulcrum of the composition, his aged hands luminous in the divine gesture that breaks convention. Ephraim appears bathed in a soft halo of light, while Manasseh, though blessed less prominently, receives quiet dignity. Asenath, modeled on Wendela de Graef, watches with serenity, her calm presence reinforcing the scene's sanctity and familial tenderness. The emotional core rests on Jacob's solemn compassion and Joseph's restrained confusion. In this moment, human judgment collides with divine purpose. Rembrandt heightens the spiritual paradox, Humility and authority, youth and frailty, tradition and revelation entwine. The figures are not idealized. Their features bear the traces of life's burdens and hopes, emphasizing that sacred history unfolds within flawed humanity. Interpretively, the work becomes a study in predestination and grace. Jacob's deliberate gesture asserts that God's election follows no earthly logic, a theme resonant with Protestant theology. The painting speaks to the fragility of human plans and the quiet force of spiritual truth, suggesting that divine blessing may rest where least expected. Its close domestic sensibility also reflects Rembrandt's personal affinity for portraying biblical events as lived experience, not distant legend. Art historians regard this canvas as a culmination of Rembrandt's spiritual realism. Its tactile surfaces, introspective light, and profound psychological depth exemplify his ability to fuse portraiture, scripture, and meditation. Even as it honors its patrons, the work transcends private commemoration to reveal a universal drama of mortality, faith, and generational destiny. In its solemn hush and radiant humanity, it remains one of Rembrandt's most moving testaments to divine mystery made flesh. Painted in 1660, Ahasuerus and Haman at the Feast of Esther marks one of the culminating moments of Rembrandt van Rijn's late career, distinguished for its psychological depth and moral gravity. Unlike many of his earlier narrative works, this painting distills the biblical drama into an intimate triangle of emotion and fate. The scene, drawn from chapters 5 to 7 of the Book of Esther, portrays the fateful banquet where Queen Esther reveals Haman's treachery to King Ahasuerus. With only 3 figures, Rembrandt achieves an extraordinary concentration of dramatic tension: Esther's cautious humility, the king's rising fury, and Haman's shadowed despair. The work's historical context is unusually well documented. Rembrandt painted it in Amsterdam, likely inspired by Hester, a 1659 stage play by Johannes Servauters, written in response to the Eastern European pogroms. The play, performed at the Schouwburger van Kampen and dedicated to Leonor Heidekoper, carried a clear moral message about divine justice and human cruelty. Commissioned perhaps by a member of the Heidekoper family, the painting also served as a means to support Rembrandt during a period of financial strain. Sold in 1660 to Jan J. Hinlopen, the work quickly gained recognition in Amsterdam's artistic circles and was even commemorated in a poem by Jan Vos, who praised its penetrating portrayal of vengeance and remorse. In compositional and stylistic terms, Ahasuerus and Haman at the Feast of Esther exemplifies the mature Rembrandt's mastery of chiaroscuro and emotional compression. The banquet itself is barely suggested. The table and vessels dissolve into dim tones, allowing the interplay of light and shadow to dominate. Esther glows with moral radiance, her shimmering robe catching the light like the embodiment of purity and faith. The king, his face half lit, leans forward in restrained wrath. Haman, meanwhile, sinks into darkness, his figure nearly consumed by shadow. a visual metaphor for guilt and doom. Through these contrasts, Rembrandt stages not merely a royal drama, but the eternal conflict between justice and deceit, light and darkness. The narrative focus lies not on spectacle, but on conscience. The moment captured is one of revelation and judgment. Esther's courage confronts tyranny, and divine providence manifests through quiet human resolve. Her lowered hands, the king's pursed lips, and Haman's heavy posture form a silent triad of emotional communication, what one critic has called restrained but eloquent gestures. The psychological realism here transcends illustration. Each character is caught at the precise threshold between thought and action, between concealment and confession. Symbolically, Rembrandt's treatment resonates deeply with the moral sensibilities of his time. The story of Esther, a woman who risks her life to save her people, embodied themes of faith, courage, and divine intervention that were central to both Jewish and Protestant traditions in 17th century Europe. Moreover, the composition's unity between Esther and the king, contrasted with Haman's isolation, visually expresses the triumph of righteousness over corruption. This ethical clarity, conveyed through nuanced gesture and light, elevates the painting from biblical narrative to timeless parable. The painting's journey mirrors its enduring significance. From Hinlopen's private collection, it passed through the Gielvink family, later entering Catherine the Great's holdings in St. Petersburg via the art dealer Gotskowski, eventually transferred to the Museum Rumyantsev in Moscow, and then to the Pushkin Museum in 1924, it remains one of the masterpieces of Rembrandt's late period. Critics often regard it as among the finest works of his final decade, a meditation on moral destiny rendered with unparalleled spiritual and psychological insight. In its restrained grandeur, Ahasuerus and Haman at the Feast of Esther stands as one of the most haunting achievements of Western art. Painted in 1660, The Denial of Peter stands among the most psychologically charged and spiritually introspective works of Rembrandt van Rijn's late period. Now housed in the Rijksmuseum in Amsterdam, the painting captures the pivotal gospel moment when Peter, one of Christ's most devoted apostles, denies his master 3 times before dawn. In the dimly lit courtyard, Rembrandt transforms this scene from a simple biblical episode into a profound meditation on fear, guilt, and human frailty, themes that preoccupied him during the final decade of his life. The composition unfolds in a deeply theatrical yet intimate arrangement. Peter, robed in white and seated near the firelight, raises his hands in denial as a servant woman points him out. 2 soldiers, their armor glinting faintly in the gloom, observe with suspicion. In the shadowed background, Christ is seen being led away, his face turned gently toward Peter, a silent, sorrowful acknowledgement of the betrayal. This fleeting exchange of glances bridges 2 emotional worlds: the physical drama of accusation and the spiritual torment of conscience. Through Chiaroscuro, Rembrandt separates these spaces with masterly precision. The flickering fire illuminates Peter's troubled face, while the darkness enveloping Christ's figure suggests divine forbearance and human shame intertwined. Rembrandt's choice of subject and its treatment reflect his deeply personal engagement with the biblical narrative. By 1660, the artist had endured financial ruin, the deaths of his loved ones, and a long struggle with solitude. These experiences gave his late works a grave inwardness that transcends narrative illustration. The denial of Peter is not merely a depiction of sin, but a revelation of remorse. Peter's anguished gesture and downcast eyes convey a crisis of faith that mirrors the universal human struggle between conviction and weakness. In this sense, the painting anticipates the moral introspection of later European art, where emotion replaces dogma as the core of spiritual experience. While Rembrandt never traveled to Italy, his engagement with European pictorial traditions was profound and discerning. Scholars have traced the compositional lineage of this work to Flemish engravings after Gerard Segers, particularly those by Schelte Abolswert and Giovanni Antonio de Paoli. Yet, as in all of Rembrandt's reinterpretations, the foreign models are absorbed into his own idiom, one defined by psychological realism rather than theatrical display. Where Segers had emphasized external drama, Rembrandt internalized the scene, focusing on the flickering light of conscience instead of the glare of accusation. His manipulation of impasto and warm broken brushwork lends the figures both substance and fragility, as if their forms are trembling beneath the weight of moral truth. The theological dimension of the denial of Peter is equally profound. The gospel story recounts Peter's failure, but also his later repentance and restoration, a cycle of sin, forgiveness, and grace central to Christian thought. Rembrandt's depiction stops at the moment of denial, heightening the pathos of separation but also foreshadowing redemption. The viewer, placed in the servant's position, becomes witness not only to Peter's fall, but to the silent compassion of Christ, whose backward glance invites empathy rather than judgment. The painting thus transforms a narrative of betrayal into a meditation on divine mercy and human redemption. The work's provenance traces an extraordinary journey across Europe's cultural history. After circulating among collectors in the Netherlands and France, it was acquired in 1781 by Catherine the Great of Russia, joining the vast holdings of the Hermitage Museum in St. Petersburg. In the early 20th century, during the Soviet Union's secret art sales, the painting was purchased by the Rijksmuseum in 1933, where it remains one of the crowning masterpieces of Rembrandt's late period. Today, the denial of Peter endures not only as a testament to the artist's mastery of light and emotion, but as one of the most penetrating visual meditations on the fragility and redemption of the human soul. Painted in 1660, Titus as a monk, also known as Rembrandt's son Titus in a monk's habit, is one of the most poignant and introspective portraits of Rembrandt's late career. Now housed in the Rijksmuseum in Amsterdam, the work depicts the artist's only surviving son, Titus van Rijn, dressed in the humble brown robes of a Franciscan monk. At once serene and sorrowful, the painting captures not only the spiritual gravitas of its religious guise, but also the deep emotional bond between father and son, a relationship marked by tenderness, loss, and mutual endurance through hardship. The composition is stripped of all narrative embellishment. Titus is shown against a dark, undefined background, his youthful face illuminated by a soft, introspective light that seems to emanate from within rather than from any external source. His head, tilted slightly downward, suggests a state of quiet meditation. The muted palette, ochres, browns, and subdued golds, enhances the contemplative mood, evoking the austerity of monastic life while simultaneously revealing the fragility of human youth. Through these tonal harmonies, Rembrandt transforms the image of his son into an embodiment of spiritual introspection, a living metaphor for resignation and inner peace amid worldly suffering. At the time of this painting, Rembrandt's life was shadowed by financial ruin, the deaths of his companions, and his own advancing age. Titus, who had become a stabilizing force in his father's turbulent existence, was managing the art business that allowed Rembrandt to continue painting despite bankruptcy. Thus, the depiction of Titus in monk's robes is not merely devotional, it reflects a profound personal allegory. The habit becomes symbolic of the renunciation both father and son were forced to endure. Not as members of a religious order, but as souls stripped of worldly possessions, seeking consolation in faith, art, and one another. The stylistic qualities of Titus as a monk exemplify Rembrandt's mature handling of paint, where surface texture and emotion merge seamlessly. His brushwork is loose, almost vaporous in parts, allowing light to play delicately across Titus's features while dissolving into shadow at the edges. The use of chiaroscuro here transcends technique. It functions as a language of inner revelation. The painting's luminosity emanates from the flesh itself, suggesting the sanctity of human vulnerability. Unlike the polished portraits of his contemporaries, Rembrandt's realism is moral rather than decorative, grounded in empathy rather than idealization. Thematically, the work resonates with Rembrandt's enduring fascination with spiritual humility and the redemptive power of suffering. In portraying his son as a monk, he channels the Franciscan ideal of poverty and compassion, aligning it with his own humanist vision of divinity manifest in the ordinary. The painting's quiet dignity echoes the broader theological shift of the Dutch Golden Age, from external piety toward interior faith. Titus's downcast eyes and gentle expression invite contemplation, positioning the viewer not as an observer but as a participant in his silent prayer. Beyond its spiritual dimension, the portrait holds a deeply personal significance in the Rembrandt canon. Titus would die only 2 years later, in 1662, at the age of 26. A loss that devastated the aging artist. Seen in retrospect, Titus as a monk becomes a premonitory elegy, a father's farewell rendered in oil and light. Its emotional candor distinguishes it among Rembrandt's final works, embodying the fusion of earthly love and spiritual transcendence that defines his late style. Today, Titus as a monk endures as one of the Rijksmuseum's most intimate treasures, a meditation on mortality, devotion, and the quiet nobility of the human soul. Through this painting, Rembrandt transforms personal grief into universal compassion, reaffirming his mastery not only as a painter of faces but as a chronicler of the deepest movements of the heart. In The Conspiracy of Claudius Civilis, Rembrandt captures one of the most heroic and mythical moments in Batavian history. Inspired by the histories of Tacitus, the painting depicts the one-eyed chieftain Claudius Civilis and his warriors swearing an oath of rebellion against the Roman Empire. It stands as Rembrandt's final secular history painting and one of his boldest experiments in light, composition, and collective emotion. Set in a dimly lit hall, the scene glows with a haunting inward light emanating from the center of the composition. Civilis, his face rough and scarred, extends his hand over a sword as his comrades do the same in a sacred act of allegiance. Rembrandt's mastery of chiaroscuro lends the scene its emotional tension. The figures emerge from shadow, their gestures illuminated like revelations of faith and defiance. Around them, the darkness deepens, creating an atmosphere of solemn destiny. Unlike the polished grandeur of his contemporaries such as Govert Flinck or Jacob Jordaens, Rembrandt chose a deeply personal, psychological approach. Civilis is not an idealized hero, but a weathered, vulnerable man marked by age and sacrifice. Through this humanity, Rembrandt transforms a patriotic legend into a meditation on courage and conviction, where the faint light of belief endures amid uncertainty and betrayal. Originally commissioned for the newly built Amsterdam Town Hall, the painting was removed soon after installation, its raw and unconventional style deemed inappropriate for a civic monument. Rembrandt, unpaid and facing financial distress, cut the monumental 5-meter canvas down to a quarter of its original size to sell it. Yet, even in its reduced form, the painting retains its monumental spirit and inner intensity, revealing the uncompromising freedom of Rembrandt's late style, stark, tragic, and profoundly human. After centuries of changing hands, The Conspiracy of Claudius Civilis eventually found a permanent home in the National Museum in Stockholm. Though only a fragment survives, it remains one of the most powerful examples of Rembrandt's genius. A painting that illuminates in flickering gold and shadow the timeless struggle between human frailty and moral strength. The Sampling Officials, De Stalmeesters 1662, stands as one of the final great collective portraits of Rembrandt's late career, created at a moment when his fame had waned, but his psychological depth had reached remarkable refinement. Commissioned by the cloth inspectors of Amsterdam, the painting emerged from a civic culture in which guilds, rather than courts, held institutional authority. These officials, performing an unpaid yet influential role, oversaw the quality of cloth in a global trading republic, whose prosperity depended on precision, trust, and professional honor. Rembrandt captures not only their functions, but the ethical weight embedded in their service. Within the traditions of Dutch civic portraiture, artists typically depicted figures stiffly, hieratically, and with little interpersonal dynamism. Rembrandt broke decisively with this approach. By choosing a low vantage point calibrated to the painting's original placement high on a wall, he positioned viewers as if they had just entered the room. This upward perspective amplifies the official's stature without theatrics. Rembrandt also adjusted the lighting to correspond with the room's real illumination, creating a unity between the depicted space and the original environment. His focus on psychological presence shapes the entire composition. The 5 dark-clad figures, their white collars forming a rhythmic pattern, appear simultaneously individual and collectively engaged in a common professional purpose. The formal structure reinforces these tensions of individuality and collectivity. The low viewpoint hides the tabletop, revealing only the thick, heavy textile draped over it. Behind the group, the dark wooden paneling evokes the disciplined, orderly environment of the Staalhof. Selective illumination highlights their alert, evaluative gazes. The Persian-style fabric, the swatch book, the open ledger, and the gloves all contribute to an atmosphere of meticulous labor. The varied religious backgrounds of the sitters, Catholic, Mennonite, Remonstrant, and Reformed, quietly reflect the pluralistic mercantile society of Amsterdam, where civic responsibility outweighed confessional boundaries. The painting interprets everyday labor as a form of civic virtue. The inspectors look outward at the viewer as if momentarily interrupted mid-task, sharpening the sense of immediacy and moral accountability. Rather than monumentalizing royalty or conquest, Rembrandt monumentalizes judgment, precision, and ethical labor, the foundations on which the Dutch Republic built its commercial strength. The quiet seriousness of the scene becomes a meditation on the moral architecture of early modern civic life, where authority arises not from spectacle, but from work performed with conscientious care. Over time, the Sampling Officials has become not only a canonical work within Rembrandt's oeuvre, but a broader cultural icon. Its presence ranges from mass culture, most famously the Dutch master's cigar packaging, to cinema, modern literature, and discussions of corporate and civic identity. Art historians return to the work as a paradigm of psychological realism and as a sophisticated reimagining of group portraiture. The painting distills Rembrandt's late style, restrained in gesture, yet rich in insight, modest in subject, yet monumental in expressive depth. Viewed through the lens of contemporary criticism, the painting's power lies in its quiet confidence. Without resorting to overt symbolism or dramatic staging, Rembrandt composes a scene that feels both intimate and public. Each figure possesses a distinct personality, yet together they form a collective bound by duty. The subtle oscillation of their poses, the interplay of darkness and brightness, and the unified gaze directed toward the viewer create a psychological field charged with responsibility and dignity. Created during a period of personal hardship, the work demonstrates Rembrandt's enduring ability to reveal the humanity embedded within ordinary institutions. In this sense, the Sampling Officials becomes not merely a portrait of a guild, but an enduring image of civic integrity itself. Completed in 1665 and now part of the Iviak bequest at Kenwood House, London, this is one of Rembrandt's most famous and haunting self-portraits, offering an intimate visual rendering of the aging artist. In the canvas, the face is fully worked up with layers of paint, whilst the body is thinner in paint and the hands are barely indicated at all. Except for the painting of the head, there is very little modeling and no foreshortening. The mysterious circles on the wall suggest the impression of a composition conceived as a surface design. The painting is in fact an unfinished work, which has not been signed or dated. Unlike the artist's earlier experimentations with trony paintings, which tended to represent excessive facial emotions, the artist now expresses a maturer approach to self-portraiture, where the forms are flatter and the facial expressions more passive. The artist now presents himself as a mournful presence with no trace of humor. Rembrandt presents himself to be in essence what he fundamentally was, an artist, holding the tools of his trade, gazing out at the viewer with a somber, contemplative attitude. The two paintings traditionally known as Lucretia I, dated 1664, and the other 1666, occupy a fascinating and increasingly complex position in Rembrandt's studies. For centuries, they were treated as paired masterpieces of the artist's late period, united by their somber palette and tragic theme. Yet recent scholarship, most notably the 2015 assessment by Ernst van de Wetering, has dramatically reframed their relationship. The 1664 painting was removed from the official Rembrandt corpus on the grounds that its structural and technical execution diverges from the painter's late style and exhibits qualities more consistent with art de Gelder. The 1666 Lucretia, however, remains firmly accepted as an autograph work. Examining the two together not only illuminates Rembrandt's evolving artistic language, but also reveals how his late emotional vocabulary was absorbed and transformed within his circle. In the broader context of his late career, Rembrandt increasingly reduced historical subjects to their psychological core. The 1666 Lucretia is shaped by this tendency. Stripped of narrative setting, the painting concentrates its entire dramatic charge in the heroine's trembling gesture, her collapsing posture, and the harrowing tension between light and shadow. The brushwork asserts its own presence, thick, broken, and tactile, mirroring the turbulence of the moment. By comparison, the 1664 painting is articulate yet more conventional. Its surfaces are smoother, its forms more controlled, and its emotional register more reserved. These features, while expressive in their own manner, suggest a conscious emulation rather than the radical, intuitive force that defines Rembrandt's true late style. The contrast becomes even sharper when approached formally. In the 1666 painting, the broad, forceful handling of the chemise and the rawness of the bloodstain transform clothing into a symbolic threshold between violated purity and irreversible fate. Light isolates the figure, turning her into an existential beacon against a void-like background. In the 1664 version, Lucretia retains dignity, but her gesture feels learned, her drapery more decorative, her pose carefully balanced rather than emotionally destabilized. These structural differences shape distinct symbolic languages. The earlier painting conveys classical virtue, while the later one plunges into the immediacy of moral catastrophe. Interpreting the two together reveals shifting ideas about Lucretia herself. In the 1666 canvas, she emerges as a profoundly human figure, grappling with despair in a way that collapses myth into emotional reality. The viewer is pulled into the psychological threshold at which dignity becomes sacrifice. The 1664 Lucretia, meanwhile, frames her tragedy through external signifiers, pose, costume, and stylized grief capturing the narrative but not the metaphysical weight that Rembrandt alone could articulate. This divergence reflects the difference between a follower's respectful dramatization and a master's confrontation with the inner life of history. Their legacy further underscores this distinction. The 1666 Lucretia has become a cornerstone of Rembrandt's l'œuvre, often cited as a prime example of his unmatched power to distill narrative into pure psychological intensity. The 1664 painting, even if not autograph, remains a valuable document of Rembrandt's artistic orbit, evidence of how his stylistic innovations circulated, mutated, and inspired those around him. Its existence enriches rather than diminishes the story, demonstrating the interpretive reach of Rembrandt's late language. Viewed side by side, the two Lucretias form a compelling artistic dialogue. One is saturated with the emotional immediacy and existential depth that only Rembrandt could achieve. The other reflects how his followers attempted, sometimes poignantly, sometimes imperfectly, to channel his sensibility. The 1666 painting stands as a singular expression of human anguish, while the 1664 version offers a resonant echo, illuminating the porous boundaries between influence, imitation, and authorship. Together they reveal not only how Rembrandt reshaped historical narrative painting, but also how his legacy unfolded within and beyond his studio, generating a spectrum of responses to the same tragic Roman heroine. Painted between 1665 and 1669, the Jewish bride occupies a singular place in Rembrandt's late œuvre, a work whose emotional depth transcends its long-standing iconographic uncertainties. The painting acquired its modern name in the early 19th century, when a collector interpreted the scene as a Jewish father adorning his daughter on her wedding day. That reading, now rejected, illustrates the difficulty of situating the painting within a specific narrative tradition. Neither costume, gesture, nor setting offers definitive clues. and proposed identities ranging from Titus and his bride, to the poet Miguel de Barrios and his wife, to Old Testament couples such as Isaac and Rebekah, Abraham and Sarah, or Boaz and Ruth, underscore how the painting deliberately withholds anecdotal specificity. What remains constant is the theme of profound reciprocal affection, distilled into a universal meditation on human connection. Placed against the broader artistic context of Rembrandt's final decade, the painting reflects his shift away from descriptive narrative detail toward an introspective, almost spiritualized humanism. By the late 1660s, he had abandoned competing with the refined finish of contemporary Flemish and Dutch classicists, embracing instead a painterly language of thick impasto, luminous color, and expressive gesture. In The Jewish Bride, this late style becomes a vehicle for tenderness rather than drama. Golds and reds vibrate with warmth, and the figures appear molded by light itself, as if emerging from an atmosphere of shared inwardness. The formal structure of the painting reveals how Rembrandt fused physical presence with symbolic meaning. The thickly encrusted red sleeve, one of the most celebrated passages in his entire output, conveys not simply material richness, but emotional intensity, its sculptural surface echoing the solidity of the man's devotion. His right hand, resting on the woman's breast, is rendered with extraordinary delicacy, suggesting both reverence and vulnerability. Her gesture in return, lightly touching his hand, completes a closed circuit of emotional exchange. The space around them is muted and indeterminate, so that the couple becomes the sole locus of attention, illuminated by a diffuse, enveloping glow. Color operates symbolically. Gold evokes fidelity, red desire, and the soft interplay between them mirrors the tender fusion of spiritual and physical love described by Christopher White. Interpreted thematically, the painting rejects the dramatic rupture typical of Rembrandt's historical compositions. Instead, it dwells in a suspended moment of recognition between two lovers. Whether they are biblical figures or contemporaries of the artist becomes secondary to the deeper narrative of mutual regard. The man's protective gesture and the woman's serene acceptance articulate a union built on dignity, trust, and emotional reciprocity. This subtlety love not as spectacle, but as interior truth marks one of the most distinctive achievements of Rembrandt's late vision. The painting's position within Rembrandt's legacy is equally significant. Its emotional immediacy and painterly freedom anticipated later European explorations of intimacy from 19th century realism to early modernism, where the fusion of surface and sentiment became central concerns. The canvas exemplifies how Rembrandt's late style, long misunderstood as careless or eccentric, operates instead as a profound reconsideration of the expressive potential of paint. Its impact reverberates in the way later artists approach the depiction of relationships, not through narrative devices, but through gesture, texture, and light. Modern criticism often characterizes The Jewish Bride as a pinnacle of Rembrandt's late period, precisely because of its ability to transcend identity and narrative while deepening emotional resonance. It is a work in which the physicality of paint becomes inseparable from the spiritual dimension of love. Viewed today in the Rijksmuseum, the painting remains a touchstone for understanding the evolution of intimacy in Western art, a testament to Rembrandt's unmatched capacity to translate human tenderness into a visible, palpable form. painted in the final years of Rembrandt's life, The Return of the Prodigal Son stands as one of the most profound meditations on forgiveness, reconciliation, and human vulnerability in 17th century art. Completed around 1668, the work emerges from a moment when Rembrandt had endured personal losses, financial collapse, and spiritual introspection conditions that gave the parable of the prodigal son an intensely personal resonance. The biblical narrative from Luke 15:11-32 becomes, in his hands, less a didactic story than a universal drama of return, repentance, and unconditional compassion. Its 17th century devotional context, shaped by Protestant emphasis on grace and interiority, undoubtedly heightened the painting's contemplative tone. Hermitage curator Kenneth Clark's celebrated remark that viewers may be forgiven for calling it the greatest picture ever painted captures the aura of stillness and moral gravity that surrounds the canvas. Within Rembrandt's artistic context, the painting distills the essence of his late style, an uncompromising turn toward psychological revelation over narrative detail, and a painterly language grounded in darkness and radiance rather than polish. By the 1660s, he had abandoned the smooth surfaces favored by his contemporaries, choosing instead a deeply tactile idiom in which light dissolves into shadow and forms appear to emerge from an inner glow. The parable of a son's return provided the ideal subject for this spiritualized naturalism. Rembrandt had treated the theme since 1636 in drawings and etchings, but the late oil painting transforms earlier dramatic experiments into a monumental tableau of inward transformation. Figures extraneous to the parable, a seated man observing, a woman barely visible in the upper left echo characters found in these earlier explorations, expanding the scene into a quiet theater of human responses to mercy. Formally, the painting unfolds like a visual prayer. The father's embrace is the structural and emotional nucleus. His hands, one broad and paternal, the other tender and maternal, form a cradle around the kneeling son's bowed figure. Their gestures articulate a synthesis of justice and compassion, strength and gentleness. The son's battered clothing, shorn hair, and collapsed posture convey abasement without spectacle. He becomes a shadowed mass seeking shelter, illuminated only by the father's radiance. The elder brother, standing rigid to the right, closes his hands in judgment, his upright stance a stark counterpoint to the father's stooping mercy. The muffled palette earth ochres, dull reds, and deep blacks reinforces the painting's devotional character, allowing light to fall almost sacramentally upon the scene. Spatial ambiguity draws the viewer inward. The composition reads less as a room than as an interior psychic landscape. Thematically, the painting dramatizes not merely the prodigal's repentance, but the existential condition of human estrangement and return. The father's forgiveness becomes an image of divine mercy, while the son's kneeling posture symbolizes the humility required for restoration. Yet Rembrandt adds a further layer. The elder brother's presence embodies the difficulty of accepting grace when one believes oneself righteous. His cold attachment complicates the painting's emotional structure, making the moment of reconciliation both luminous and troubled. The parable's theological core, "This brother of yours was dead and is alive again," is transposed into a visual language of silence, touch, and illumination. The painting's legacy is inseparable from its reception as a pinnacle of Rembrandt's spiritual vision. Critics such as Rosenberg have described it as the artist's spiritual testament. surpassing all Baroque precedents in its evocation of religious mood and psychological insight. Janssen called it Rembrandt's quietest and most moving work, a moment that stretches into eternity. Its influence extends beyond art history into theology, philosophy, and literature. The Dutch priest, Henry Nouwens. The return of the Prodigal Son reframed the painting for modern readers, interpreting Rembrandt as embodying both brothers, estranged, wounded, prideful, repentant, before arriving at a mature understanding of forgiveness. For Nouwen, the painting becomes a mirror of the human spiritual journey. From the standpoint of an art critic, the painting achieves what few works in Western art accomplish. It creates an atmosphere where narrative, theology, psychology, and painterly materiality converge into an image of profound stillness. The figures seem suspended in a moment outside of time, illuminated not by natural light but by the moral clarity of compassion. The canvas reads as both a culmination of Rembrandt's lifelong exploration of human character and an embodiment of the parable's core message, an image where the darkness of existence is pierced by the redemptive tenderness of a father's embrace. Rembrandt's self-portrait at the age of 63, 1669, occupies a singular position in the artist's long pictorial autobiography. Painted only months before his death, it distills more than 5 decades of artistic searching into a final distilled statement of identity. The work emerges from a turbulent personal horizon. The deaths of Saskia, Hendrikje and Titus, years of bankruptcy, and a shifting art market that had long ceased to favor his manner. Yet the painting refuses to slip into despair. Instead, it offers a portrait of a man who has weathered the storms of life and reasserts, at the very end, his authorship and sovereignty as an artist. Seen within the broader development of his late style, the portrait embodies Rembrandt's ongoing insistence on truth over flattery and material essence over superficial display. The limited palette of lead white, ochres, and red lakes reflects the disciplined restraint characteristic of his final decades. His technical approach, thin veils of translucent paint layered over a dark ground, reveals a painter more invested in the tonal and psychological depth of the human face than in decorative finish. Compared to earlier self-portraits, the late work pares away almost everything that is not essential. No props, no elaborate studio interior, no narrative costume. What remains is simply Rembrandt confronting the viewer and himself with extraordinary candor. Formally, the portrait is a study in contrasts between the meticulously rendered aging flesh and the deliberately indistinct robe and background, between the clarity of the gaze and the blurred positioning of the hands, between the confident pose and the signs of physical decline. X-rays revealing pentimenti, an originally larger white beret, and hands once holding a brush and maul stick suggest that Rembrandt initially conceived this as a statement of professional identity, but then chose to strip away the symbols of craft. The shift heightens the emphasis on the man rather than the painter, even as the material handling of paint asserts his mastery more eloquently than any tool could. The face, sagging yet luminous, becomes the primary site of meaning. Interpretively, the portrait reads as both an unvarnished record of mortality and an affirmation of artistic resilience. Rembrandt's expression-steady, almost serene evokes neither resignation nor self-pity. Instead, it carries a kind of inward authority, the quiet power of one who has seen enough of life to no longer require external validation. The clasped hands, indistinct yet gentle, reinforce this introspective mood. Light settles on the face like a final benediction, suggesting that the act of painting itself becomes a form of spiritual reckoning. It is a meditation on presence in the face of finitude. Its legacy is profound. As one of his final 3 self-portraits from 1669, the painting has become emblematic of Rembrandt's late humanism and a key touchstone in discussions of psychological portraiture. Its survival through multiple collections and its early acquisition by the National Gallery in 1851 helped cement Rembrandt's canonical status in 19th century Britain. Modern viewers often read it as a prototype of the modern artistic self, vulnerable yet authoritative, scarred yet undiminished. The painting's pared-down directness shaped later portraitists from Van Gogh to Lucian Freud, who saw in Rembrandt a model of fearless introspection. From an art critic's vantage, self-portrait at the age of 63 is less a farewell than a summation Rembrandt's final argument for the primacy of truth in art. The work is austere, unadorned, even incomplete at the edges, yet it carries an emotional density unmatched by more polished portraits. Its power lies in the tension between Rembrandt's physical frailty and the undimmed vitality of his craft. In this sense, the painting becomes a profound paradox. His body is fading, but his painterly touch thick, alive, searching, is as confident as ever. It is the last word of an artist who refuses to diminish himself even as time closes in. Rembrandt certainly lived beyond his means, bidding up his own work at sales to increase his profit, and buying paintings and prints, which may have contributed to a court-arranged auction in 1657. He sold most of his prized possessions, which included Roman busts, Japanese armor and Asian objects, sets of minerals, paintings, and a large collection of other antiquities. He later sold his house and printing press to move into a more modest dwelling on the outskirts of Amsterdam with Hendrikier and Titus. The Amsterdam Painters Guild had introduced a new ruling to establish that no one in Rembrandt's financial situation could trade as a painter. However, Hendrikier and Titus set up a partnership for a new business as art dealers with Rembrandt as an employee. By 1662, Rembrandt via the new business was fulfilling major commissions for individual portraits, group portraits, and other works. When Cosimo III de' Medici, Grand Duke of Tuscany, came to Amsterdam in 1667, he honored Rembrandt with a visit to his home. Rembrandt outlived Hendrikier, who died in 1663. He passed in 1669 in Amsterdam and was buried as a poor man in an unknown grave. The grave was a kerkgraf, numbered and owned by the church, under a tombstone. After 20 years, his remains were taken away and destroyed, which was customary for the remains of such poor burials. one of the first modern artists, Rembrandt had a deep understanding of the importance of detail in the depiction of the world around him. He was renowned for his outstanding ability to not only depict very natural, realistic human figures, but even more importantly, to portray deep human feelings, imperfections, and morality. He trained many painters of his time who were eager to emulate the characteristics synonymous with his name, including the many pupils who rotated throughout his workshops in Leiden as well as Amsterdam. His influence on painters around him was so great that it is difficult to tell whether someone worked for him in his studio or just copied his style for patrons eager to acquire a Rembrandt. His dedication to the truth and beauty in everyday life was adopted by other artists of his time like Spanish painter Diego Velázquez and by painters in 18th century Germany and Venice. His style was reinterpreted by, among other, the German engravers Johann Georg Schmidt and Christian Wilhelm Ernst Dietrich, and later served as inspiration for painters like Jean-Honoré Fragonard and Giovanni Battista Tiepolo. The 19th century saw a Rembrandt revival for realist painters working in places like France, Germany, and America. In 1888, Vincent van Gogh wrote to his brother Theo that he thought about Rembrandt's work a lot, but also about the master as a man and a Christian. He explained, "Rembrandt goes so deep into the mysterious that he says things for which there are no words in any language. It is justice that they call him Rembrandt. Magician. That's no easy occupation." Van Gogh also painted directly from life, portraying his subjects with realism and dignity. He described Rembrandt's religious works as metaphysical magic and strove to emulate him. Rembrandt's dry points and etchings furthered Van Gogh's expressive freedom with a reed pen as well as his choice of subject matter. In the 20th century, Rembrandt influenced artists such as Frank Auerbach and Francis Bacon. He was crucial to Bacon in terms of mark-making and the handling of paint, explained Pilar Ordovas, director of the Ordovas Gallery in London. Similar to Rembrandt's late self-portraits, such as Self-Portrait with Two Circles, 1665, Bacon's self-portraits are unsettling and mysterious. In 2013, an art exhibition titled Raw Truth opened in the Rijksmuseum of Amsterdam that featured paintings by Frank Auerbach and Rembrandt. The evidence of Rembrandt's influence was shown through 6 of Auerbach's 1960s oil paintings. Both artists were dedicated to penetrating to the core of their subjects. Raw Truth was Auerbach's description of the quality that ensured the Dutchman's enduring influence. As director of collections at the Rijksmuseum, Taco Dibbets summed up best, "Over the centuries, Rembrandt has inspired artists in different ways. He depicts different humors, different moods, different psychologies. There is such depth to his personalities. The essence of his genius is that, rather than trying to make the people more beautiful than they are, he depicts them as they really are. That makes his portraits immensely humane and approachable. Unlike, say, classic Italian portraits, which are far more aloof and less direct, Rembrandt didn't try to please his subject or the viewer. With Rembrandt, you are looking at real people." Today, Rembrandt's work remains a pivotal element in art history, reflecting Dutchness and painterly greatness. Artists continue to draw upon his exquisite realism, infusing contemporary works with the master's indelible legacy.